Hearing my hearing myself talk already is like, not my favorite thing, hearing your own voice. So hearing two of me is really painful. So anyway, so yeah, we've got three grandsons. They all live in Nashville. We have four daughters, and they're all over the place. And my family's my most important priority, probably just like you. But second to that, being a teacher has been for 33 years. The part of my identity that I feel most proud of, and I'm ready to talk to anybody at any time about how hopeful I am about the future because of the kinds of kids we have. And even though our jobs are among the toughest there is, I still, after all these years, feel so much pride and excitement about what I get to do every day. And I'm in a district on, if you know much about the Cincinnati area, on the east side of town is Claremont County, and that's where I've been serving the community there for my entire career. I started out there right after I graduated from Miami of Ohio as a long-term sub and have worked there in one capacity or another all these years. And I'm a teacher on special assignment now. And from year to year, that means something different. Responsibilities change. But right now, I'm working on the reopening of 7 libraries. And I work with our gifted identification and testing, and have the opportunity to work with our arts teams and new teachers, and the list goes on and on. But I say all that just to say that I work in a district probably not so much different from yours, in that sometimes we don't have all the resources we need, and sometimes we don't get all the support we need from here or there. But we find ways to make it work, and creativity is really the spice of our lives. And a lot of the ideas I'm going to share today, really, this sounds funny to say, but come from a place of frustration or desperation or just looking for something to engage kids and take their thinking to a deeper level. So it's my hope that in this session this morning that you'll find it to be practical, that you'll find it to be something that give you something to chew on for a while and talk to your colleagues about. And there are a whole lot of resources to share, and I hope you're going to take notes, because we've got a lot of research to tell us that if you make some kind of visual representation while you're learning today, whether it's a big mess in your notebook or you're typing onto a device, you're likely to remember a lot more and remember it for a longer period of time. So let's see. During this session, what do you need to know? If I'm getting ready to start a virtual session, I always want to know, like, what the timing's going to be like and all that kind of stuff. So just know that since it is 3 hours, we will take a little break in the middle. I'll need one, and you probably will too. And so we will do that probably for about 10 minutes. We'll just turn off our cameras and mics and take a little stretch break. And there are a couple of things that I would say you should know ahead of time. There will be a slide that has a QR code on it. So if you want to snap that code, it's going to take you to a virtual gallery of a lot of examples about what we're talking about. So if you have a phone with a QR code reader, you'll have that handy. You're welcome to take pictures of anything on the screen. I won't be sharing my entire slide deck, but there are resources here and there and different things that are going to be in the Google folder that Wendy set up for you. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And then other than that, it's my hope that you are just comfortable wherever you are and that you can just relax and learn. And that's how we all learn best anyway. So in my home school district, we have a couple of unwritten rules. One of them is, and somebody told me this like more than 30 years ago, and I've still remembered it, that if you're ever presenting to teachers or teaching teachers, it's a sin to waste a teacher's time. So I think that's true. And I respect it when somebody acts and believes that way when they're teaching me. So just know that we're going to use our time wisely, and that what I've planned today, I did it with that in mind, trying to think of the things that I think will be most useful to you in learning about this topic. And then the other one I already know you're going to agree with, even if I can't see your face today or we've never met before. I know you know this is true. And that is that the best professional development always ends a few minutes early. So if I could hear you right now, you're probably cheering and clapping. So we'll for sure end just a couple minutes early today, just so you're aware, because I know you've got lots of things that you need to go on and be doing, and some of you even have some professional learning this afternoon. We will use the chat quite a bit, so I hope you're comfortable doing that. By this time in our lives over the past couple years, I feel like we're all just really comfortable doing all we have to do in a Zoom call or a Google Meet call. But I'll depend on you to use that chat from time to time, just so I can feel connected to you and sort of know where you're at and be responsive in my teaching to you. So I thank you in advance for getting in that chat and just sharing your thinking or answering a question I might pose or something like that. But most of the time, I'm going to be sharing images with you, and my slides are very image based. There are a few that are a little text heavy with some research on it at the beginning, but other than that, we're going to be responding to images, and I hope that that is appealing to you. It certainly works for me when I'm learning. And let's see, if I had to divide this morning into sections in my head, if I think about like where we're going with this topic of sketchnoting or visual note taking, I would say at first we're going to look at the why. No surprise there, but I think that's important. And we're going to look at just things that influenced me when I started to write about this topic in Ink and Ideas. And we're going to look at a little bit of research, some pretty recent research that can inform our thinking about this. I just think it's important for us to sort of come, even though we're not in the same room, to come to some agreements together about what this instructional strategy can look like and why it's important. So we'll spend a little bit of time there, but not too long, I promise. And then we'll look at a whole lot of student work samples from, I don't think I have any preschool, but we'll start with kindergarten, and we'll look at all the grade levels. We'll look at different subject areas. So if you're an art educator, there's certainly going to be a lot of interest for you. But don't worry, if you're a social studies teacher or an ELA teacher or science or math, it wouldn't matter. There are examples across the curriculum and across grade levels. And so I think there'll be a little bit of something for everybody. So after we look at all those student samples, just to widen up the possibilities of what this could mean in classrooms, then the last part, I think the best part, is going to be when I ask you to pick up a pen. So during the break, if you don't have something with you right now, make sure you get some colored pencils or markers or whatever it is you want to use, because we're going to actually put our learning to the test and try out some sketchnoting together. And we'll be learning about some content and learning about the process of sketchnoting at the very same time, and do a little bit of reflecting about that. If time allows, I might expand the focus a little bit towards the end, just about visual literacy in general, with some practical things that any teacher could use to help images spur deeper thinking. So I hope something in that menu that I've just described sounds good to you. And we're going to dig right in and get started. So just 1 minute here. And I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. And right now, you should be seeing a slide that has the covers of my books. And so, Wendy, you can either text me or unmute your mic just to let me know that my screen share is working. Okay, perfect. I've had a little bit of trouble lately in the past week or so, so I just wanted to make sure. So, as Wendy already told you, I've written a couple of books. And my first book was Comprehension Connections. It came out in 2007, so I can't believe it, 15 years ago already. But those first two books that you see at the top are both books that try to take complex ideas that we talk to kids about all the time, like summarizing and using your background knowledge and all of that, and try to make them concrete with a concrete object. Sometimes people call that realia, something real from our lives. And so that's always been an interesting way to teach for me, but I hadn't really read any books about it, so I decided to write a couple about it. And then the book at the bottom with the white cover, that book is an unusual book. It has about, I don't know, 14 or 15 authors. Everybody contributed one chapter. My chapter is the very last chapter at the end of the book. And everyone contributed about what they think comprehension's like these days and where we are right now and where we think we're moving. And then my newest book that came out in 2019 is Ink and Ideas. You see it there. When we were trying to come up with the title, and I never knew this, I sort of always thought that the author got to come up with their own title, but that's not true, at least in my publishing company. There's like a marketing team that looks at all kinds of factors about titles and how Googleable they are and everything like that. But anyway, we finally settled on the title Ink and Ideas, and I really loved how concise that was. The only issue was there weren't any other books called that, so that was good. The only issue was that there were a couple of tattoo parlors with that name. So if you ever run into a tattoo parlor with that name, it doesn't have anything to do with me, but I just like the title, so I'm glad it worked out. But that's my first book in color, which makes all the difference, and especially for this topic, it really needed to be a book in color. So if you have a copy, I'll be referring to a couple of things on the way through, but if you've never seen the book and don't have a copy, no worries, because I will be sharing with you some of the best ideas and best thinking out of that book. And just as long as you have a pen and something to take notes with, you're going to be in good shape. So here's my contact information. I think Wendy said she put my Twitter name in the chat already, but I'm on Twitter, and that's really the only social media I use. I don't use Facebook or really Instagram, but for teaching, I use Twitter almost every day. And I'm constantly sharing books and ideas and charts and videos, et cetera, about things that I see that I think are interesting in lots of classrooms that I'm in. And if it's anything to do with this topic, sketchnoting, then I use the hashtag Ink and Ideas. So you can find a lot more information on Twitter with that hashtag. And then I do have a Google site that has some more examples of my work and a little bit more about what I do. You can find that at tannymcgregor.com. And it's just a basic Google site, so nothing fancy. And then my email address, that might be the most important thing you jot down, is tannymcgregor@gmail.com. Because after today's session is over, if you have a question or want to share something, please reach out. I would love to hear from you. And especially if you try out something in your classroom over the next couple of weeks and have a question or comment, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'll share this information again, I think, at the very end of the session in case you didn't catch it now. So, Wendy, I'm not sure if you already shared the link to the Google resource folder.
I did.
Okay, perfect. So you should have received a link to a folder that Wendy created, and I dropped in a whole bunch of resources. And so sometimes during this session, I'll just mention that, oh yeah, that's in the folder. There are a couple of articles in there about sketchnoting, a whole lot of templates, a few other things that I think connect to our subject today. And so take a look at that sometime, when you get started with all of it. And some of it might not make too much sense right now, but after this session, we'll have a chance to put it all into context and you'll see all the connections between the things that are in there. And there might be things that during the session today, I think, oh yeah, I ought to drop that in there. So you might want to check back later after the session's over. I might drop a couple more things in that folder, but it's a really nice way to do our handouts and didn't have to print anything or get anything to you. And I just wanted to give a little apology in advance because I am sharing a space with a border collie this morning. And so she sometimes gets little playful spurts and I never know when that's going to happen. So I think I already heard one bark in the background. I don't know if you heard it. Hopefully she's going to be a good girl this morning. And but I just wanted you to meet her because you might hear from her in a little bit. So I want to start this morning with a simple Venn diagram that was co-created with a group of first graders probably about 17 years ago. It's a long time. And I was working with a group of first graders, and their teacher was team teaching with me, and we wanted to get across to this group of kids that, it's really your thinking that makes the difference. If you read at a certain speed, or if you are really accurate with your reading, or if you read out loud and it sounds really good, all those things can be great. But if you're not thinking while you read, then you're missing out. And since this chart was created, I've thought about it a lot. I could exchange that word text for a lot of other words. I could put paintings where the word text is. I could put drawings, I could put sculpture, I could put architecture. I could put a chart or a map. I could put a table of information or data. Anything that we're having our kids merge their thinking with, that's when it becomes real for them. And you won't hear me during this session mention a lot of programs or things that you can go out and buy to try to make this work. All you really need is something to think about with your kids and some way to make your thinking visible. Whether that's, if you had an iPad cart and you used a sketching app or Google Drawing, that's great. If you just had a stack of plain white paper and some pencils, that's great. And you're going to see examples of all those things. It's really the reformulation of your thinking that matters, that makes it real and rich. And so anytime that we are ever together, so if I ever get the chance to be with you again, or we're at a conference or something like that and you hear me speak, I'm going to probably mention this Venn diagram again, because I feel like it's the underpinning of my thinking with everything I've written, with everything I do now with my school district and other places I visit. And maybe the most important thing about that whole chart is the heart in the middle. And that was the idea of a little second grade girl who said to me, Mrs. McGregor, if you think while you're reading, you're going to love it more. And I couldn't have put it better myself. So that heart showed up in the middle and it's been there ever since. And I also love what one of my students named Peter came up with: text plus thinking equals real reading. So we could say, images plus thinking equal real viewing or real looking. And so we could change that in so many ways. But this is the way it started out. And of course, when we're thinking about all this and considering what happens in the invisible part of our brains, that we can't see, we can't really share what we're thinking unless we draw it or talk about it or write about it. We'll just call that metacognition. And that's really not the subject of our session this morning. But when we're asking kids to reformulate something with a pen or pencil in their hand, it is an exercise in metacognition. It's a really rich way to reflect when you're thinking about your own thinking. So even though this Venn diagram appeared a long time ago in my first book, I still feel like it has everything to do with what we're going to learn about today. So I want to start now with this first section about our topic, and I have to tell you it has a Kentucky connection, and really I could say this is where it all started for me. So my family's from Pulaski County. I don't know if we have any Pulaski County educators here today, but we could be related. You don't know. We'll talk later.
We have several.
Oh, good. So my family's farm was around Bethel Ridge, and I visited there as a kid and spent summers there. But this picture was taken in the early 1940s. That's my grandpa on the right, my grandma in the middle, and 5 of their 10 kids. And these are the youngest 5 of their 10 kids, boy, girl, all the way. And that happens to be my mom in the front in the little light blue dress. And I think this picture was colorized, so who knows what colors those dresses were to begin with. And my mom's 80 years old now, and so that gives you just some context for this picture. Well, I really wanted to just mention my grandpa, although I dearly love every single person featured there, and many of them are still living, so blessed. But my grandpa was born in 1900, and he was born in that same area, probably around Mintonville. Those of you in Pulaski County might know where I'm talking about. and the Green River Knob was real close to my family's farm. But my grandpa, he quit school when he was about in fifth grade or so, and a lot of the boys did the same thing. Wasn't unusual. He just started working and never became what we might call a proficient reader or writer, although he was one of the smartest, most creative people I've ever met. The thing that I want to mention about him today is that he always read with a pen in his hand. And I noticed that from the time I was small because when I would visit, I'd sleep on a pallet of quilts in their living room. And that happened to be where his special chair was. And so every morning before he'd get, breakfast or get outside to start working, he would, and my family raised tobacco, probably no surprise, but my grandpa would sit with the Bible in his lap, and what some people would say is he'd annotate the Bible. Only it wasn't just words. He'd draw little things. He'd have arrows going this way and that. He'd circle things. He'd draw what we might call icons. He'd fill the white space. He'd fill the margins with his thinking. Harvard has a special word for that. They call it marginalia, which I think sounds sort of funny, but that's really what he did. Nobody taught him to do that, I don't think. I think it was the way that he understood. He realized that he could comprehend if he had a pen in his hand. And maybe some of you are like that. I would imagine, and this could be true of art teachers or any teacher, that some of you, if you're sitting in a meeting that goes very long, you're doodling on a piece of paper, you're making a border go around the paper, you're writing the same word over and over. It might be connected to what the content of the meeting is, or it might not at all. And that's what I watched my grandpa do. Even in the Somerset newspaper, he would annotate it. He'd write on it. Even, at lunchtime, he might do that, and then he'd crumple up the paper and throw it away. Because there really wasn't anybody in the house for a while. Like my grandma didn't read much, and he'd be the one to read the newspaper. So anyway, all of that I always thought was fascinating, and I just wish now I had a chance to talk to him about all that. But you've probably known a lot of kids, if you've been teaching for a while, who are the same. Kids who tend to want to doodle or draw, kids who want to have a pen in their hand, kids who would rather be making that visual representation or creating something more than anything else. And I have seen that tendency in many kids and have come to understand it differently in getting to know myself better because I'm that way. If I go to church and I'm sitting there and it's time for the sermon or the message, I'm about 5 minutes in before I'm taking that bulletin and I'm making some marks on it. Luckily, in the church bulletin where I go to church, there's 1/3 of it that's blank that they leave for notes, so I appreciate that. But if I'm in a professional development like this, I really have to do that. I've got to be making a mark or else I have trouble focusing. And I know there are a lot of kids like that, and maybe you feel like you're like that too. So anyway, I just want to give a little tribute to my Grandpa Hollis right there. So here's a few things. Here are a few things that have influenced my thinking when I found out I was going to write this book, Ink and Ideas. And I went to my publisher and I just said, like, somebody's going to write this book and I want it to be me because I feel like I have the heart for it and I have been thinking about this topic for more than 50 years, and that's not an exaggeration. I started keeping a notebook specific to this topic, and here are a few of the pages that were in the notebook. I had this one where I realized, maybe I'm slow to realize this, but the word ink is right there inside the word think. And I love it when some of my primary students will notice that because that's a good way to remember it. We're going to be inking our thinking, even though it might just be with pencil or colored pencil, or it could be with a stylus on a screen. We're just going to call it ink. And that thinking that materializes on the page or the screen, that's where it really matters. That shows, what we can't see. I'll sometimes tell kids, I wish you had a trapdoor on the top of your head. I'd lift it up and look in and see what you're thinking. But the only way I can know how brilliant you are is if I can hear you talk about your thinking or see you write about it or draw about it. And I don't think we give kids as many opportunities as we should to give them ways, like time and show their thinking in visible ways, where there aren't a lot of rules attached, where the conventions of writing aren't attached, where we're not worrying about paragraph form and or complete sentences, but we just want kids to get their thinking out. You'll see a whole bunch of different ways that I've seen teachers do that very thing, and that I try to do with kids too. Then there's this quote from Shane Parrish, who is, I think, a brilliant person who gives lots of advice to other people about working and thinking. And he says, just remember, taking notes is not really the point. The point is to avoid reading passively. And I would say it's to avoid viewing passively, it's to avoid listening passively. So we don't want robotic, students who are just going through the motions and doing the minimum of what, they're expected to do. We want kids who are practicing making their thinking the priority, and everything they do, making it thinking intensive. There was a movie that came out a few years back called Words and Pictures. Some of you might be interested in finding this movie. I don't know if it's on Netflix or not. I need to look that up. But it came out in Cincinnati, like at a little theater in Marymount, and it was only showing for a couple weeks. One of my friends, who is an English teacher, called me and said, "You've got to get down there and see this movie before it's gone. It's a movie about teachers, and I think you're going to like it." So what you see here on the picture, that's a high school English teacher, his character is, and an art teacher who was newly hired over the summer. And even though in this picture on the front, it looks like they're getting along great and friends and colleagues, well, not exactly. So I'm not sure why they chose that picture, but I won't ruin the ending for you or anything. But I'll just say that the guy on the right, the English teacher, he believed that if his students had a good vocabulary, if they had a good grasp of how to write well, then that would be their ticket to success in life. They could do anything they want if they have, good reading and writing habits and are strong in those areas. The art teacher came along and she heard that that was his priority, and she told the kids that's not exactly right. That people have been communicating with lines and colors and shapes and icons and symbols long before we ever had an organized linguistic system. And so she would tell them it's really the pictures and symbols that's where it's powerful. If you want to reach somebody at the heart level, then you need to look there. And so, of course, as you might be able to infer, their students get involved in this argument, and I won't tell you what happens with them at the end, but you can probably predict that they all come to the conclusion, the kids involved, included, that words and pictures working together, that's really a strong way to communicate. So William Albert Allard, who was a photographer for National Geographic, he sums it up for us right here in this quote. It's one of my favorite quotations that I'm going to mention today. Words and pictures can work together to communicate more powerfully than either alone. If I'm working with younger kids, and I don't know if you can still see my face on the screen or not, depending on how your screen's set up, but if I'm working with little kids, we'll do this. I'll say you've got words and you've got pictures, and if you put them together, that's where you can really think very strongly. We can communicate really strongly. There's something magical that happens when we put words and pictures together. So in Ink and Ideas, I try to explore this, like I said, across grade levels, across content areas. I've worked with a lot of art educators who have come to learn along with me about this topic, and I've learned a lot from them. And by the way, I have a really close relationship with an art teacher, and that would be my husband. So we've been married 28 years, and my husband's been an art teacher for 26 years. So you can share ideas from this workshop with your colleagues. Let's say you have a colleague who's not here today and you think they'd really love this topic. Maybe the best way to share with them would be to share the link that you see at the top of your screen. It's from the publisher, so Hein is short for Heinemann, www.hein.pub/Ink and Ideas. the publisher has kindly put about the first 40 or so pages of the book online for free. And you just have to put your name in and so forth, and then you can access that download. Um, the good part about that, it's not just random pages from the book, it's the first section of the book. So it has all the research in it. And anybody who might be skeptical about this or think it's quote unquote just drawing or nothing gets me more riled up than a phrase like that when somebody says it's just reading or it's just drawing. But anyway, anyone who would want to know the why behind all of this would simply need to go to that link. And now you'll have that link too, should you want to share this with your colleagues, like even in a meeting or if you ever have to lead professional development at your district or something like that, and you want to use this topic. And I'm always happy to share resources with you. And of course, you'll have all those resources in the Google folder. So just know that that's there. And like I said, maybe the best way to share what you've learned with somebody else would be to share that link. Sort of sums it all up. So if I'm going to introduce sketchnoting to a group of kids, sometimes I share this particular page from my sketch notebook where I wrote the word sketch notes, and I have some green arrows pointing to different benefits that can be reaped if you'll give sketchnoting a try. Now, first of all, let's just talk about the word sketch notes. We actually know where that term came from. It's not a new idea, of course, and I would never want you to think that I think it is. I mean, just as I said, proved with my grandpa, there have been people down through time who have thought this way with a pen in their hand or a pencil in their hand, or wanted to draw something in response to what they were thinking or learning or listening to. But it's just that we might have had other names, and there are so many other names for it that it can get confusing. Some people will just talk about note-taking or personalized note-taking, or like I said, Harvard might call it marginalia, or visual representation, or image reformulation. I mean, all those names are great, but they have way too many syllables for me, and they're hard for kids and parents to understand. I like the word sketch note. I think it just sums it up perfectly, and it has that little overlap of, you're making something on the page when you sketch, but it's also could be a kind of note-taking that's really personal and creative, and the sky's the limit with what you want to do with it. So we know where the term came from. I think the person who coined the term is Mike Rohde. His last name is Rohde. He's from Wisconsin. He actually wrote a book called The Sketchnote Handbook that wasn't specifically written for teachers, but was written for anybody who wants to learn to, make their thinking visible. And so anyway, I believe that's where the term came from, sketch notes. So that's the term I use with kids. You wouldn't have to use that term, but I just will probably refer to what we're doing as sketch notes mostly throughout this session. So I want kids to know that there are benefits to doing this. It's not just, something fun that we just learned about and that we want to try, although it is very fun, or can be. It's way more than that. It can help you in a lot of ways, and I think kids deserve to know that, and I think a lot of kids want to know that. They want to know the why behind the things we do. So I'll say to kids, I'm going to ask you a question to go along with each of these green arrows. Let's go up to boost recall. So have you ever been reading something and 5 minutes after you read it, you can't remember a thing that you read? Most kids will raise their hands, and I'll raise my hand. And because I want kids to know that it's rare that somebody can read and remember everything, or view something and remember everything, or listen to something like a podcast or a sermon or a lecture and remember everything. Like, our brains just aren't really designed like that. And so I want them to know that if you learn to sketch note, it can help with that. It can help you remember more, and it can help you remember it for a longer period of time. So we've got evidence to show that there's a link between visual note-taking and memory. That's really huge. On the right-hand side at the top, I've got deepened comprehension, and I'll ask kids this question. Have you ever been reading something, and right in the middle of it, you realize you don't even know what they're talking about? You don't get it. And most kids will readily raise their hands. I'll raise my hand and say that happens to me all the time. Sometimes I'm in the middle of reading something and I think this vocabulary is unfamiliar to me and I don't exactly know what they're talking about. I might feel like I need to reread it or talk to somebody else about what it really means. I want kids to know that that happens to all of us. Sometimes meaning breaks down for whatever reason, and sketchnoting can actually help us with that. We can actually sketchnote our way to a deeper understanding of something when we think with a pen in our hand. And when I say pen, I mean stylus, and I mean pencil, and I mean marker, whatever your tool might be. On the lower left-hand corner, maybe my favorite benefit, help to maintain focus. The question I'll ask kids is, have you ever been reading something and you start to realize that you're not able to pay attention very well? Maybe you're hungry, maybe you're worried, maybe you're sleepy. There are lots of reasons why we can't maintain focus. It happens to everybody. But we have a lot of evidence to prove that if we are making a visual representation, it helps us to pay attention. It helps us to tune out the noise in our heads. And it's the opposite of what a lot of us think as adults or as teachers. Sometimes we feel like it's evidence that kids aren't paying attention if they're drawing or doodling on a paper, and I've come to really change my mind about that. I think for many of us, it's an intuitive way to help keep ourselves on track or focused. So I hope some of you are shouting amen at that, because I feel like we've got a long way to go in educating each other about what that can mean when a student has that tendency or urge to make something visible on the page. And then I guess it goes without saying, it's a different kind of engagement when you are thinking and reformulating at the same time. So there are misconceptions, and I know I can use that overused phrase, preaching to the choir, with the art educators here today, as this is probably a battle that you fight from time to time, that there's a misconception with some of us, that when we're making something or creating something, that it's something nice to look at, or it's cute, or it's pretty, and that's where the purpose is. And I just want to say, even though it may be not even necessary to say it to this group, that this is way more than just trying to make something colorful. It's way more than just trying to make something look like it came from Pinterest, like the lettering or something like that. It's not just about making appealing looking notes, although for many kids that happens, it does. They really want to learn about how to make their notes more design friendly and visual and all of that. But that's not the purpose. There's a way deeper purpose, and purposes, I should say, and they come from all these things that I just went over. And there are even more. One more we'll talk about here in a minute. So it's not just about making our notes pretty. I love this idea from Jeffrey Zeldman. He says it in a more academic way than I was just able to. Content precedes design. Design in the absence of content is not design, it's decoration. Now, I'm all for decoration's sake. But I also know that if you're a social studies teacher here today, you know that what you do is content driven. And if you're an ELA teacher or a math teacher or the science teacher here today, you know that you might be interested in this, but it's not going to be absent of content. It can't be. You've got to do it all at the same time. And so I think this is interesting. I hear people go both ways with this. Some people will say it's about the thinking, it's not about the art. Well, you won't hear me say that, because I think it's both. I think it's an and. I think the design matters. I think the content matters. I think the kids' thinking matters. I think it's all together. That's what makes it complex. But I don't want someone who's unfamiliar with this instructional strategy to just think it's just decoration, it's just surface level, it's just cute, because it's so much deeper than that. And that's why we're spending this time on this right now. So I want to share with you a few research studies, And I think what I'm going to do first, however, is stop sharing for just a moment. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to go back into the chat, and I'm just going to mute my mic for a minute. And I'd just love to know what your original, like your beginning thinking is going into today. Just react to anything I've shared or said. If you have a question, certainly you can put it in there, but I'd just love to know what you're thinking. Was there anything from this morning so far that has resonated with you? And then after you type in, if you just spend a minute scrolling through the chat to read the thinking of others, that would be great. Since we're not together in the same physical space, we'll rely on the chat to help us connect our thinking this morning. So it looks like we've got 73 people logged into this call, and if everybody can put some thinking in there, we're going to have a rich conversation. So let's just take a minute or so. I'll mute my mic and be back with you in a moment.
Can't deal with their yelling at each other.
All right, let's come back together. I maybe got about halfway through reading all those comments. So, Wendy, if it's possible, if you could send me the transcript of the chat, I would love to be able to really take time and read through everything. I did appreciate what Lynn said. She mentioned that she uses Cornell Notes. I think maybe, Lynn, you said eighth grade social studies, and that made me think, I don't know that I ever had anybody teach me about any kind of note taking until I was in high school. And in my freshman English class, I had a teacher who taught us how to take notes in that, what I think is a really complicated and very rule bound way of outlining with Roman numerals and uppercase and lowercase letters. And I got so caught up in the form of it that it really wasn't about my thinking too much. I was just trying to do it right. And so that was my first probably real like formal instruction about note taking. When I got to Miami and college, somebody taught me about Cornell note taking, and I loved that. And I still use forms of that. And I think you can use that with sketchnoting with no problem at all. And for those of you who haven't used that before or it's been a while, it's just when you separate the page into 3 spots, and each of the places has its own intentional purpose, and you sort of synthesize or summarize at the bottom. So thank you, Lynn, for mentioning that. And then Tony reiterated just that intersection of words and pictures together, how powerful that can be in note taking. And how many times, have we either taken notes just with words, or felt like we wanted to draw something but didn't. Or how many times have we ever modeled this for kids so that they can see that there's lots of possibilities and ways to get your thinking down? So that's something I really try to do more often than not now. I want kids to see that there are lots of ways to go about this, and you got to find what works for you and your thinking. So thank you for entering all that in the chat. I appreciate it. And we're going to go right back to the slides and to this research. So hopefully you can see a slide that says the drawing effect at the top. The drawing effect. Evidence for reliable and robust memory benefits and free recall. This is a piece of research from Wams, Mead, and Fernandez, 2016. Look at what it says there. Drawing enhances memory. And this drawing effect holds true regardless of how much artistic talent a person has. That is good news. That's good news for a lot of us. So if you're a person joining this call today and you're thinking, I don't know how I could teach this because I only can draw stick people, and if I draw a horse, it doesn't look like a horse. Don't worry, because it's not about how talented you are as a visual artist. As we all know, there are a lot of kids who are, and they can bring that talent to this, and that's amazing to give them yet another chance in school to be able to use that and shine. But I'm going to show you just as many examples where kids are just getting their thinking down and putting it out on the paper, and it's going to serve the same purpose. It's going to get, you're going to reap the same benefits. And so I think this is a bit of good news, and that kids need to know this, and teachers too. Somebody in the chat a minute ago put something about that. It's hard to get your other content areas to sometimes buy into the fact that visual representation has an academic outcome to it. So here's another one, and I'm just going to share a few of these. This is Kaimal, Ray, and Muniz, 2016. This one also is like a benefit that most of us need, and maybe most of us need it right now more than ever. The stress-related hormone cortisol was measured after subjects created visual art. 75% saw a reduction in their cortisol levels. Now, I'll have kids say this to me, like not in these words, but I'll have kids say to me, Mrs. McGregor, I love this. Can we do this again? This is so fun. And I can sometimes feel, and art teachers who are here know what I mean, when kids get started on the creating part, you can almost feel this, I don't know how to put words around it, but a sort of calmness come over some students because they're switching into this different mode in their brains where they're trying to find flow. And it's just, like I said, it's hard for me to put into words, but sometimes I can feel a difference come over a class when we're doing some sketchnoting project together. And just the fact that most kids jump right in. I'll have kids every once in a while who will hesitate or just want to watch others for a little while before they dive in, and that's all okay. But eventually I just want kids to know that, it's not about, what you feel like your art ability is. It's more about what thinking is going on in your head and how you can get it out and how valuable that is. And then I guess the study that really got things rolling for me and made me want to write about it, this topic, is from Jackie Andre, 2009, so a little bit older. First appeared in the Journal of Applied Cognitive Psychology, and it was called What Does Doodling Do? You can probably read the abstract online. So she found a few things. That when the first one, thinking with pen in hand enhances performance on monitoring tasks. So like she found that people could remember lists of random things longer if they were making some visual representation, writing it down, drawing it, that kind of thing. Also, here's the quantified part of the study. Note takers recall 29% more information. So that really sold it to me, that you can remember that much more if you're making some kind of representation. And then, this is a really cool part too, unlike, lots of multitasking kinds of situations, if you are reading or listening or viewing while you're doodling or drawing, you can reap the benefits of that, and it doesn't separate, like the cognitive load in your brain and weaken it, it makes it stronger. So we've all heard about how multitasking really doesn't get you where you want to go. But in this case, it actually helps boost the level of your thinking when you are creating something with pen in hand. So all those things right there, like, just make me happy. These are things I had a hunch about before, but it's really good to see the science behind it. So when I shared with you that link earlier from Heinemann, these studies and others are mentioned in that first 40 pages that you can get as a free download. And I go into these studies a little bit more, of course, and mention some other things that have influenced me. But those were the big ones. I'll go backwards for a minute. So you don't have to be, a visual artist to get the benefits out of this. And you can see a difference physiologically in yourself when you're creating something in a positive way. You can remember more, and it actually just enhances your performance. So, gosh, who needs more reasons than that? You can pick one of those and I'm sold. So there are so many reasons why this is important. So now let's transition more into a practical realm. We're going to get to all those kids examples here shortly. And then after that, we'll take our break. And then after that, we'll come together and try it out. So that's where we're going. But a few things, I just want to make sure that I mention some books that I know of that have something to do with this, or something else that really just connects and helps us put it all into perspective. So we'll have a little bit of that before I start sharing kids examples. So here's a book, a picture book. I use picture books with all ages of kids. I'll use picture books with 4-year-olds. I'll use it with 14-year-olds. I'll use them with adults. This book, called Notable Notebooks, was written by Jessica Fries Gaither. Jessica is a teacher in Columbus, Ohio, at the Columbus School for Girls. She's the science teacher there, and she teaches all ages of girls science. She realized that scientists make their thinking visible. Like, many scientists down through the ages have left behind evidence of this, from Leonardo da Vinci all the way up through, let's use Jane Goodall as an example of a contemporary scientist, and many scientists in between. Draw, jot, doodle, make mistakes, make it messy. Leonardo da Vinci even wrote backwards. And so we're not talking about leaving behind beautiful books of artwork necessarily, although I think it's artwork in its own right. It's beautiful. But we're talking about brilliant scientists who used a pencil and just got their thinking down. So I know a few years ago, Da Vinci's notebooks came to the Museum Center here in Cincinnati, and I went to see them, and they were under these glass domes, and it was just, wow, breathtaking to see these notebooks, right? I could get so close to it and see all of the models that he drew, sometimes conventional writing, like in a sentence, sometimes a word, sometimes a phrase, sometimes a labeled diagram, sometimes a timeline. I mean, he knew that there weren't any rules when it came to getting your thinking on the page. It was more like what some people call an idea flood. He flooded the page with his ideas. And then we've got someone like Jane Goodall, who is still keeping notebooks and who has hundreds of thousands of pages that she's created through her career, where she does use more conventional writing, like complete sentences, but then she'll create a color-coded section or do a little drawing. And so it's all these things together. It's that words and pictures coming together to really make some rich meaning. So this book is available in paperback from NSTA Kids, and it shows in a really simple format how scientists make their thinking visible, and is great for any, you don't have to be a science teacher to show it. If you're a teacher who, keeps notebooks with your kids, like reading notebooks or writing notebooks, or if you're an art teacher and you want to show kids how, their skills when they're learning to draw and sketch overlap into the content area, would also be a great book. I started thinking about this same topic, okay, scientists are known for making their thinking visible, but in what other disciplines is this true? And the more I investigated, the more excited I got, because I saw that this is universal. Musicians keep notebooks, jot down ideas. Songwriters, poets, entrepreneurs, certainly artists, scientists, Mathematicians, you'll see lots of names that are familiar to you on this screen. And they all did it in their own way. Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets, kept journal after journal with scribbled little sayings or ideas or, the origin of Miss Piggy or Kermit, and you might not even recognize them in their first iterations. I just think it's really interesting how brilliant people over time tend to make their thinking visible, whether it's to share it with other people or whether it's very personal. So they just have a place where their thinking is gathered and it's real. And so I feel like convicted about this, that I don't give kids enough time to experiment with this at school. And if this is true, that so many brilliant people go about it this way, why wouldn't we let kids know that this is a viable way to be a thinker and grow in your thinking in this world? So there is this book too called Presidential Doodles. Those of you who teach history or social studies might be particularly interested in this book. It's a little square hardback book written by David Greenberg, and it shows how every president from George Washington up through George W. Bush has been known to leave behind doodles or drawings, especially after important or high stakes meetings or summits. I think that's really interesting. It shows how many of our US presidents have dealt with stress or anxiety while they're thinking with pen in hand. And so you've got on the left-hand side Herbert Hoover, where he was known for his concentric shapes and pencil scribbles, and he'd just fill up the pages. People thought that he was losing it. Like, he doodled so much. And even when he was supposed to be making eye contact with somebody, he'd have the pencil on the paper. They called in a psychologist to secretly diagnose him and look at the doodles and see what they meant. And that person came out in the newspapers and said, "It is normal," as you can see in the headline. Everybody does it. And so I love that. And for a time, even in schools in America, it became like the cool thing to do. And people took his patterns that he made and put them on neckties and aprons and children's clothing, and just went a little wild for a while. But then, and I don't know, I have my own opinions and feelings about this, but I feel like the more we have moved towards a high stakes testing culture, and we all can agree that we're like just ensconced in that, I think the less we have tended to value non-traditional or out of the box or creative pathways for thinking. And that couldn't be any more unfortunate. So all of these things I'm sharing with you, I just think are just justification for why we need to let kids experiment with pen in hand and be transparent and share their thinking in any way that seems natural or possible for them. On the right-hand side, you see where John F. Kennedy wrote the word Vietnam over and over and over on a piece of White House stationery. And this was like after a really high stakes meeting. And, I don't think anyone would have accused him of not paying attention. I think it's evidence that he was paying attention deeply and thinking deeply. So, I guess there's a difference between doodling and sketchnoting. And for me, doodling would be sort of mindless marks on the page, like that repeated square, or writing the same word over and over. That doesn't mean there's not thinking going on, though. That's the shift. For many kids, that means they are fighting the urge to be unfocused. They're trying to focus. It's their way to focus. Now with sketchnoting, and that's really the purpose for us this morning, that's more when we're merging in content and what's being represented on the page isn't like a mindless shape or repeated word. It's reiterating or reformulating what kids are learning. So I think there's a difference, but I think there's value in both. One of the articles that I dropped into the Google folder that you have access to is from Harvard's Lamont Library. Susan Gilroy, the librarian, wrote the article. You'll find it to be really interesting, I think. It has 6 habits that she recommends that incoming freshman at Harvard engage in if they really want to make it. And if you read between the lines a little bit, she's sort of saying like, okay, you're really smart and, you know, you had a high GPA at your high school, but I just want you to know you're going to have a lot to read and you're not going to have time to reread all of it before an exam. So you better do it right the first time through. And she encourages kids to pick up a pencil and make a visual track of their thinking along the way, come up with some simple symbol system, some kind of coding. It doesn't have to just be some way of note taking that a teacher taught you. Do something that works for you. And she even cautions kids against the overuse of the highlighter, that if you're only using a highlighter to make your way through text, then you're becoming dependent on that. And that's sort of a robotic behavior too. You might not even be thinking. So just if you have time sometime and are more curious about this subject, you can find that article in your folder. So the big question always, it seems to be, you know, something we want to talk about is just the idea of pens and paper and devices and screens and what's better and what should we be using. And I'm an advocate of both. I think that, well, typically when I introduce sketchnoting to kids, I always use paper and markers. And I might use markers because I don't want kids to be erasing all the time at first. I think it's a great way to introduce it with something concrete. What you're seeing on the left-hand side is my flare pin collection. And actually it's in a Carhartt screwdriver roll. So my friend bought me this canvas tool roll, and she said, I think this will work well for your pins. So it does. But I love using flare pins with kids, and I know they're expensive, but I try to get my hands on them anytime they're on sale, like at Sam's Club or something like that. The app that I like to use, however, so if I'm in a classroom, there's one learning center that I'm involved with that has a cart of iPads that was part of a grant from Duke Energy. And so we use the app called Paper by WeTransfer. And there's the symbol that you'll see in the App Store. At the end of my book, Ink and Ideas, I give a whole bunch of ideas for sketchnoting apps. But even since my book came out two years ago, there are so many more. So there are tons out there. And sometimes I just use Google Drawing, and that's, you know, something kids are familiar with. And we do a lot of clicking and dragging of shapes and, you know, using colors and inserting text and that kind of thing. A totally different feel than marker on paper. But I love giving kids all the experiences. Let's just try it all and see what you like. And then ultimately, don't we want our students to be choosing what works best for them? Because we want them to like engage in this practice their whole live long lives. And so they've got to, you know, just be able to do what they can with the resources they have and know what works for them. So that's my answer to that. As I said, you know, we might like draw a line, no pun intended, between doodling and sketchnoting, and I think both are valuable. If you're interested in learning more about doodling, I would suggest viewing Sunny Brown's TED Talk, The Doodle Revolution. So it's Sunny with an I. It's only 5 minutes long. She packs a lot into this 5-minute TED Talk and talks about like the neurological impact of sketching and doodling on a page and how it changes you mentally and physically. And it's just a really good basis for all this. I would share this as a recommendation with a disclaimer, however, because she uses a little bit of crude humor at the beginning. So probably not a good fit for your students, but a good fit for you to watch just to understand just the whole doodling thing more. So if you struggle with like, how often should my students doodle and all of that, like, is it showing that they're paying attention or not paying attention? Take a look at what Sunny has to say. It might help you clarify your thinking. You know, one thing I'm not saying that kids should be able to draw and doodle all day long whenever they want to. Of course not. I'm working with a particular student right now who's in 2nd grade, who wants to draw all the time and sometimes wants to draw when he's struggling with content as sort of a place to retreat to. And so we're not feeling good about that. And so we're trying to use and leverage you know, his love and inclination to doodle and draw to be a positive in his learning experience. So I'm working through this just like you are with your students, and there's no 100% right answer for every kid. We know that's never true with anything. So now let's move into some student examples. And I love this part because this just shows you how the sky is truly the limit with this, and there are so many ways to go about it. And I'm going to share with you some student samples used with permission. I'm sharing these with permission. Many of them are in my book. Some of them aren't, though. Some of them have been shared with me from other teachers, but a lot of them I was right there in the classroom when this happened, and that's the case for this one. So this is Matthias's work. He was a kindergartner at the time. It was December of his kindergarten year. I was team teaching with his kindergarten teacher, and we had some other visitors in the room, and we were just sort of experimenting with what does it look like with 5-year-olds when you're having them make a visual representation to do things like sequencing and summarizing, like some of these big difficult concepts. What does that look like when a kid's 5? And so this is Matthias, and he didn't do any writing except his name. Everything was symbols. Everything was drawings. Not so unusual for a kindergartner. We used Dolly Parton's The Coat of Many Colors as our text. So we listened to the song, we listened to Dolly sing it. There are 2 versions that I know of the picture book of the song. We looked at those and read those together. And then we gave kids, as you can see, a simple window pane organizer, and we numbered it for a little extra support. The teachers had chart paper sticking on the walls, and we were doing this at the same time the kids were, and we revisited that song. And so we played just the first little bit of the song, and we asked kids in box 1, what could you sketch note? And we called it sketch note because some kids were using words and some kids were using pictures. Only a couple kindergartners were able to use both at this point. So we listened to the very first part of the song, and Matthias drew a box. And of course, all his friends were very impressed that he could draw a 3-dimensional box. So that was really a distraction. It took away from the lesson there for a couple minutes. Everybody was so interested in Matthias's box. But he drew a box because Dolly's mom had this box of rags that somebody gave her, and she used those rags to piece together a coat of many colors for Dolly. And that's what you see in box number 2. And so then we played a little bit more of the song when Dolly wears that coat to school, and she's so excited to show her friends, and they didn't understand. They thought a store-bought coat is way better than a coat that's made from hand-me-down rags. And so there in box 3, you can see all the kids sort of gathered around, and there's Dolly frowning, and the kids are really sort of making fun of her that she has this coat made out of rags. Number 4, at the end, is when Dolly goes home, and in Matthias's mind, she climbs on her mom's lap and is reminded that it's love that's the most important, not money, it's love and family. So when I saw this example from Matthias, I ran to the copy machine because I just could not believe all the things he did without even a single word. He was able to determine importance, which is a comprehension strategy that many of our older students struggle with. He was able to capture deep themes. Look at box 3. If ever there was a picture where bullying was shown in a simple way, there it is. I dare us to even try to find another way. Look at how the little stick figures are pointing at Dolly even, and the expressions on their faces. And then number 4 really got me. Like, he got around to one of the possible themes of love. And so if I looked at the standards for kindergarten, I could just check mark a whole bunch of them. Not that standards are ever a checklist, but just so many of them that we touched on by asking him to listen and view. And we talked a little bit together too, and create this synthesis really of what the text was all about. So it could be something as simple as what you see there. Here's a first grade example. This is from Williamsburg Elementary in Williamsburg, Ohio, a rural elementary school where I work about once a month. And in this first grade classroom, Cindy, the teacher, has her students do idea floods. I think I mentioned that phrase before. where she might, at some point in the writing process, or if they're learning about a topic, give kids a plain piece of copy paper and say, all right, we're going to make an idea flood. I want to see everything you know about the topic. All your new learning, show me in words and pictures. So we've got a first grader here who uses a few more words, but still is relying a lot on drawing. She only, I don't know if she didn't have time to color or what, only the pencils colored in. But you see Abraham Lincoln represented here, and that was her research topic. Every student had a different topic. So you see Abraham Lincoln getting married, you see him at school, you see him working. You even see misconceptions when kids sketch note, which I think that's really valuable to know. So here she has a misconception. Maybe you already picked up on it. She has Abraham Lincoln driving a pickup truck. It's right there in the middle. So we know that was not actually what happened, but in her mind, she did not know that, and that's what she's thinking. So, this is a fun, cute example, but I've had with other kids, even older kids on more complex topics, something in their sketch note shows me that they have a misconception about the information, and that's really valuable for us to know. So even considering giving kids a chance right before a quiz or a test to have an idea flood. And they can even walk around the room and see the ideas of other kids and come back and add them to their idea flood. Here's a third or fourth grade example. I don't remember which. This comes from a classroom in Lebanon, Indiana. And I was in the classroom. We used the text about the Dust Bowl. The text was on the left-hand side, and we just made a little double entry organizer kind of thing where the text was chunked on the left, and then there was a little sort of Post-it note sized area on the right where kids could create a sketch note. So as you see here, you've got the kids would read, they would talk a little bit, and then sketch notes. So I always tell kids, if you're sketch noting, especially like if it's at social studies or science, and you see a year or something quantified with a number or even a proper noun, probably important. You might want to put it in there. So you can see she puts 1931 when the Dust Bowl sort of started. Then in the middle, I love this, the farmer's standing there. There's a blue dust mask. We all know what those look like. There's the Red Cross symbol. And there's the farmer asking, will I get enough air today? And that's not even in the text. So here we have a student paraphrasing, which is a higher level of thinking. Great to see. And then the one at the bottom is just a little recap of facts. Here are the states where the Dust Bowl was the worst. Texas, Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico. And then she puts the big topic at the bottom, the Dust Bowl, and uses that brown crayon to show how the dust was just, filling the air everywhere. So for those of you who use text in your class, consider using a little chunk of text, giving kids time to talk and draw. Read, talk, and draw, read, talk, and draw all the way through a passage. Here's something that was sent to me from a teacher in Mobile, Alabama, and I thought this was a great idea. She gives her kids little white index cards, like 3x5 index cards, blank ones, and asks them to create their exit tickets. And so they can write, they can draw. It doesn't have to be complete sentences. Here's one on crawfish on the left. Here's one on the flu on the right. I see labeled diagrams, I see facts, I see logos, I see slogans, be a flu hero. So these can be things that kids are thinking on their own, things that come from articles or chapters that kids have read. And I just had never thought of using sketchnoting opportunities in an exit ticket kind of situation. I love that. Here's a third grade example, just on a piece of regular notebook paper, where the student created a one-pager. And I hear a lot of people using that terminology, making a one-pager. And so I've heard teachers say, you've got the four corners of the page. You can go ahead and fill it up with your thinking. This student did what a lot of kids will do. She put the topic right in the middle in larger letters and then just sort of webbed her way out to the edges. What I love about hers, well, first of all, this is a kid who is very motivated by color. And you know those kids, and maybe you're even like this. If you see a new pack of markers or brand new crayons, your heart starts racing, and that's this girl. And so she couldn't wait to use all the colors and all of that. So that's wonderful when that's a motivator. But it wasn't just that. She put facts, and she also put how she reacted to the facts. Like she puts below freezing, 44 negative. And then right above that, she puts brr, cold. So sketch notes welcome all of those things, not just the facts, not just, regurgitating what you see in the page, but also what you are thinking is just as important. Now, on the other end of things, here's Ben, a boy who only wants to use pencil. Even if there was a brand new pack of markers sitting on his table, he would still use to choose pencil. And so this student, he was in a reading club. They were all reading a little book called Seed Folks. And what you're seeing here is 6 chapter summaries. So after each chapter, he made a little sketch note. And those little boxes are numbered. At the end of the book, the kids brought their sketch notes together and had a really rich conversation because they had this visual information right in front of them. It's like a synthesis. So 6 visual syntheses right here, all created with pencil. And I think this boy is really talented at doing this, being able with simple icons and a couple little dialogue bubbles to show what happened in that chapter. Just a few more before we take our break this morning. The next one is, next 2 are from middle school, and I don't know where that big red mark came from. Sorry about that. Did that without realizing it, I guess. So on the left-hand side, that's from Andrew, and I was going to show you, I don't know if you can still see me, but if you can on the camera, every once in a while in Ink and Ideas, there's some green pages, some bright green pages. Those are vignettes that other people wrote and contributed to my book. So like a first-year teacher might write one, or a parent, what she's noticed in her child with sketchnoting. And so this one that you see on the left is actually one of the vignettes. And this was a boy, Andrew, who was listening to his teacher read aloud from a book. She was reading Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, obviously chapter 5. And Andrew was one of those kids that we sometimes really couldn't tell if he was listening or not during a read aloud. And it took away all doubt when we told him he could sketchnote. When I interviewed him the next day about it, because we were so impressed with what he did, he said it was a dream come true when she said we could sketchnote. So I'll have some kids who choose to just listen to a read aloud. They don't want to create something. But other kids jump at the chance to not have to just sit still and be quiet during a 5 or 10 minute read aloud when they can be creating a sketch note in their notebooks. And then on the right hand side is a science example, a sketch note that nobody even assigned. And this is how you know it's really working, when kids start to do it on their own time. This little girl was reading her science homework and decided to make a 1-pager. And she brought it back in the next day and said, look what I made. It was easier to read my science homework because I created this at the same time. Labeled diagram, flow chart. The year 1800 must be really important. She increased the font size and highlighted it. So many things I can tell about a kid's thinking. It's so much richer, so much more nuanced to look at their sketch note and think about them and what they're learning than as opposed to answer 4 questions at the end of a passage, which gives you very limited information. For many of you, wow, I must have just made this red mark on lots of slides, so sorry about that. That'll just be distracting. I'll try to ignore it. This is just a reminder to all of you who use vocabulary with your students. And that would be probably most of us at one time or another introducing new vocab. If we want it to stick around longer, have kids make a quick sketch. Use the word, use the picture, have some discussion. This is from a 4th grade classroom, and I just loved the little picture she drew for muscular, so that's why I picked this one. So I thought that was pretty good. So I think we've known this for a long time. Most teachers know this, that vocabulary becomes more long-lasting if we make some visual representation of it. And then here's a page from a science notebook. So if you are a science teacher, just know that, you have a visual language already. Science, the language of science is so visual, so it works so well, so easily with science. And same with social studies. This is from a 6th grade teacher. She shared this with me. I've used KWL charts for a long time. What I know, what I want to know, what I learned, but I never even considered having a visual element added to it. So, sketch noted KWL charts. I think we can rethink a lot of things we do that we've done for a long time and think, okay, like I'm just making this about conventional language. How can I make this visual at the same time and give more opportunities for kids to really enter? It's like an entry point, enter the text, enter the topic, and really think about it. And using color sometimes just makes it come alive. Mathematics, same thing. Math's already a visual language. I just love this example. So this is from a math teacher, fourth grade math teacher, who will sketch note her problem of the day. She'll make a quick sketch note of it. She'll slip it under the document camera or put it up on the screen. And then the kids sketch note their responses back to her with possible answers. So as you can see here, she wrote the problem in conventional language. Mrs. FH took Ava and Tallulah to see a movie. They each had a bag of popcorn and a drink. How much did they spend on the trip to the movies? And then she sketch noted the information that they needed to know. So I think I would have been more successful as a math student had I had more opportunities like this to sketch note my thinking. And then we've got kids like Jack who are just so talented, and this gives them a way to help themselves and others understand the text. So the text is Romeo and Juliet, not easy text to navigate. He just had a stack of sticky notes on his desk and sketch noted his way through the text over a couple of weeks, every act and scene. And I think he could market those. I think they're so good. And then we've got Ty. Ty is another student who's featured in one of these bright green vignettes in my book, Ink and Ideas. And Ty's vignette was written by his mother. She wrote about how he was struggling through Biology 1 and learned to sketch note and started, doing this as a study tool, making one-pagers right before a quiz. So this is his review of amino acids content right before he had a quiz. So amazing. I think this is like, wow, this could help so many people. I wish I would have been sitting by him in Biology 1. That would have helped me a lot. So I think we've got all different levels of talent. And that's the beautiful thing about this. And we have research to show that you don't have to be especially artistic, but you can start to make these design decisions and think about elements of design that, maybe sometimes in art education, we are asking kids to make those kinds of decisions when they're creating a work. And yet this can also be the same kind of thinking they can bring right over into their content classes. This is a fifth grade at Ayer Elementary in Forest Hill School District here in Cincinnati. They have a group of kids who love sketchnoting so much, they decided they wanted a sketchnote club. And so during lunch on Fridays, they cover their lunch tables with white paper. Everybody brings their pens, gel pens, markers, and you bring your lunch and you bring whatever book you're reading, and they sketch note and talk. So it's sort of like a book club, but they're sketch noting and eating, and I was invited to join them one day. And so I thought that was really a lovely idea. A very popular table kids want to sit at. So here's that QR code I mentioned, and then we're going to take a break. So I'll leave this QR code up for a minute or two, moving into our break. What this is a collection of sketch notes from across the US and Canada. It was created initially in 2018 for the International Literacy Association Conference. And many teachers dropped in examples because we wanted to see what everybody else, and I'm seeing on my phone alerts that some of you are joining the album right now. So awesome. But if you go to that QR code, or you just go to that, use that URL that you see on the screen, you'll be able sometime when you have a chance just to look through a lot of high school examples there, a lot of pieces of work that show you that it's across genres. So it might be in response to poetry, in response to a physics article, et cetera, et cetera. And you are more than welcome to add your students' examples to this gallery, because the more the better. And so I'll leave that on the screen. Before you go to break, however, I have one request, and that would be, would you go into the chat just with a connection, opinion. So far, out of all those practical ideas, what's one thing you think you might try? Like the exit ticket or the KWL, the one pager, the idea flood? What's one of those things that you think you'll try? Put that into the chat and then go ahead and take 10 minutes and we will reconvene at, let's see, you all are on Eastern time. I think most everybody is, right? And so we'll reconvene in 10 minutes. So on Eastern time, that's going to be 10:40. So I will see you in 10, but please enter something in the chat before you go. Thanks, everybody. All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Hopefully you had a chance to get up and stretch your legs and get a refresh on your drink. Even though I love being together with everybody in the same room, it is so nice when we can, even on a Saturday morning like this, still make it happen. Joining through Zoom. I'm glad we're all used to this format and we can learn this way together. Thank you for being here this morning. So I loved reading through the chat. So many people have so many ideas that they want to try. And not just that, like taking the ideas and making them your own and putting your own spin on it. That's the best. I always feel like when I write ideas down, for possible lessons in books, I'm always afraid that somebody might look at that and think that's the script or that's the way it should be taught. And I never want to approach it that way. You are the one who knows and loves your students, and you know how to take something and craft it so it's best just for them. So I think that's the best compliment ever, when somebody takes the seed of an idea and turns it into something even better. And I also loved it how somebody, at least one person, put like, I'm going to try this on Monday. So that's the best. If you're already thinking you might try it on Monday, then I am just so happy. We can end this workshop now. I just think that's the best. So not really. I want to try it together with you. So you need some paper, and we're going to try out a sketchnoting lesson. And I would call this a launching lesson. And so I'm going to give you just a second to make sure you have paper and markers or whatever. And while people are doing that, I just wanted to respond to a couple things that Wendy let me know about. Like some people still wondering like about doodling in class. And I think, we talked about that a little bit before. I think there's a time and a place for everything, of course. And just like I mentioned with this one student who's in second grade that I'm working with his teacher right now, it can't be that a student is disassociating or not engaging with other things because the drawing or doodling gets in the way. But I think, and this is just my opinion, you might ask somebody else and they give you a totally different view on it. I think if we can teach kids to channel that or use it as a processing tool, then I think it can be a really good thing. So just knowing that for many of us, kids and adults alike, use the whole idea of pen in hand as we're processing something. Here's an example. My mom lives in Florida. I only get to see her maybe 3 times a year. We talk on the phone every day though, and she is a big phone talker and I'm not. And so I listen. She can talk for a long time, and the older she gets, she is telling me lots of different things about the past and so forth. But I will sometimes, so that I can focus and give her the listening that she deserves, I'll have paper and pencil and I'll doodle while she's talking. It really helps me attend to what she's saying. Same as what I mentioned about, in church with the sermon. So I know myself well enough to know that that's not an escape for me. It's not keeping me from listening. It's helping me listen. So it's being used as a processing tool. So I think you've got to know your kids. You've got to watch them and their habits. And I just think it's something to think about and see if you can maximize it instead of trying to shut it down all the time, which is what many of us, myself included, have done with kids. I mean, I'm not proud of this when I say that when I was a 3rd grade teacher, I taught 3rd grade for 11 years. And I taught 1st grade before that. But when I was a 3rd grade teacher, I would often say to kids, like, if y'all are good all week long, then on Friday we can draw when I'm reading out loud, like saving it for way in the future for a reward instead of trying to use it in the moment. So anyway, that's just a little extra on that. And then a few people were wondering about my grandma and grandpa's name. My grandpa and grandma were Hollis and Murdy Spa. And I think the story is 2 brothers married 2 sisters. Hollis and Herschel married Murdy and Gertie. So I just love those names. And my grandma was Murdy. So, All right, now we'll get back to the topic. And Wendy, thank you for texting me those things. If there's anything else that comes up, just text me and we'll address those. So if I'm going to start a sketchnoting launching lesson, I might use a picture book to get started. And if I have time, there are a lot of great picture books out there. Peter Reynolds books would be good, but these are the two books that I really like to use: The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes and Beautiful Oops. The Girl Who Never Made Mistakes is a good book if you have kids who are very perfectionistic and, want to throw away the paper and get a new one every time they do something they're not pleased with, or if a stray mark gets on the paper or a hole or something. And then on the right, Beautiful Oops, Barney Salzberg just shows us how everything can happen that you can think of when you're creating something, and it's not always what you want. And it can be a stain or an unwanted mark, or it just doesn't look like you wanted it to look in your head. And instead of thinking about those as errors or mistakes, we're going to think about them as beautiful. And so I even use the phrase beautiful oops with kids. I'm sure the art educators here have lessons about this and have different special ways they talk to their kids about all of this, about the process and how it's messy. But if you're not an art educator, it might not be something that you've really talked to kids about too much in creating something visual. But I like to have one lesson where it's like an official launching lesson. It's almost like you're blessing the practice. You're noticing it, you're naming it, you're calling it sketch notes. You're saying to your students, this is a real way to think. This is a real way to process thinking, and we might use it in our class from time to time. So let's try it out together today and learn about it. So that's what I'm going to be doing with you all. Now, I might take 45 minutes to do that. I have no idea what your schedule is like, if that would even be a possibility, but I would just do it one time, call it the launching lesson, get it started, and then offer up opportunities for kids to practice it here and there until they become more independent and can use it when they want to. Some people might go about it a different way. This picture of a chart was sent to me from a teacher in New Hampshire, I think, or Maine, and her name is Kitri. She teaches 5th grade, and in her classroom, they just talk about it in terms of a toolkit. You've got all these different tools that you can use to make your visual notes, bullets and maps and arrows and frames, and they just keep adding to these chart papers all year long so kids know, oh, these are all different little features that I can add to my visual notes to make them more interesting and expressive and meaningful. So I think that's a great idea. I've never done it that way though. I tend to use a sketch map that I create. Whether it's this one or another one, I have different versions of different things I've tried. This particular sketch mat is in your Google folder with the resources. You're welcome to use it and anything else that's in there, or make your own. But I like to have some experiences with kids where they use big paper, so like 11 by 17 or something like that, where it feels like a placemat more than a regular worksheet. And so we've got this big mat right in front of us, and we're just gonna relax and have a good time with it. I try to make it very low stakes, not feel like it's pressure, let them know this isn't graded or assessed or anything. This is just play. We're just gonna play with this idea for a little while. And so you can see I labeled some of the spaces: lettering, faces, bullets, connectors, etc. And then there's one large blank space, and that's where we're all gonna make a sketch note about something, something in common. And so I ask kids not to write in that big space until later on. Sometimes they will anyway, as you know, they don't always follow directions. And so then I might have them just flip the paper over and work on the back of it. So it doesn't matter. Like I said, I want it to be as joyful an experience without any negatives associated as possible. So if we were in person together, I would have brought these with me and you would have been working on one of these. But just know that it's in there if you want to use it with your kids. So we're going to try out each of these features, and we're going to move through it one at a time, giving you some time to play around. And I'm going to do the same thing. See, I told you to get some paper and I forgot to get some. Let me grab some here. And we're just going to try it out. And if I'm doing this at the same time you're doing it, then it's going to be a little easier for me to paste the slides and so forth. So that'll be good. And then at the end, after we've practiced some of these features, we're all going to try a sketch note around a common topic, and I'm going to give you something to read about her and show you some pictures and all of that. So let's get started with lettering and fonts. So on your page or in your notebook, go ahead and play around with a letter or a number. Just pick one. I chose the letter T. And by the way, all these slides that you're going to see in this series are just little index cards with black Sharpie marker. Nothing fancy. I just made them, quickly. And so if you would just pick a letter or a number and make as many different styles of that letter or number as you can think of. And you can make them similar to the ones I made if you need that support, or you don't even have to look at what's on the screen and just make your own variations. And I'll let you work for just a minute before I come back on. There's always the choice you have to make, and art teachers have to make this choice all the time. Do I show the kids an example or a mentor piece, or do I let them work just starting from scratch, with their own ideas? And with this, I found it to be more successful if I do show them these cards that I made. But I have found that most kids just look at them for a minute and then they just go to it on their own. So they're there for support for those who need it. But a lot of kids will just take off with their own ideas after a minute, which is great to see. So while they're working, I might remind them, we're not trying to make the prettiest letters in the world. We're just trying to make some different styles so we have different ways to express ourselves. And maybe it's that you want to learn how to make a big, bold, important kind of letter. So you can show vocabulary words, or you can show the theme or the big idea or the gist of something. And just by changing up the lettering style when you're taking notes, it can really transform the way you think on paper. And so kids will just take a minute or two, and I'll walk around the room just to see how they're doing and highlight different creative ideas that people have had and all of that. I encourage kids to look at each other's papers as much as possible with this because there's no reason not to. We all get better ideas from looking at what other people have done and changing it up and copying and all of that. I mean, that's a good thing in this case. If we were together in the same room, I'd be asking you to do that at your tables. All right, so that's lettering. Hopefully you've had a minute to tinker around with that. Let's go to the next one. That would be connectors and arrows. So with this, I would just say really get comfortable with connectors and arrows because they are going to be your best friends when you are creating a sketch note. Because sometimes you want to show sequence, or you want to show relationships between things, ideas, or characters. Maybe it's that you want to show cause and effect. Instead of writing that all out, which can take a lot of time, you can just use an arrow or a connecting line of some sort. So take a moment and try some of those and create your own. Because here in a minute, you're going to be trying this yourself, and you'll probably need to use some at that point. So this is just the tinkering around time. Probably the feature out of all these that I use the most often in just about any sketch note I'd ever make. And again, this is a quick way to get your thinking down. The sketch notes are just quick. And they're not, like detail oriented, like what kids might practice in the art room. They're just the initial quick thinking way to get your thoughts visualized, in a concrete way. So I'm going to go backwards for a minute. So we started with lettering, and then we moved to connectors and arrows. Next, we're going to go to frames. We'll save bullets for later. So frames would just be any kind of shape that you want to use, or any way that you want to go about it, so that you can separate off some part of your notes from another part. Maybe even draw attention to something in your notes. It's almost a way of making your own graphic organizer in the space, since you have space to use. So it could be a geometric shape, it could be brackets or parentheses, or a bubble or a sign. So I just showed a few ways. And so why don't you take some time now to practice a few frames that you might use. A great way to call something out, draw attention to it, to show importance, really just to organize your thinking. So that would be frames. And then when you're ready, let's go on to bullets. This one might be the least important out of all these features, but still can add some visual interest. So instead of always using a little darkened circle for an unordered list, you could use an icon or a shape. Some of my favorites would be, I had a class where they read an article about the weather, so some kids made little clouds or little tornadoes for the bullets. Anything that's in the text and you can think of, oh yeah, I could use that for a symbol, something to do with the text, would be great. So try out a few of those. And I will sometimes remind older kids, like, this is for when you put a list in your notes that's not ordered. If it was ordered, we'd probably just use numbers and number the items. But if it's not an ordered list, then you're free to use some symbols or icons.
Mom has a picture.
All right, hopefully I'm giving you enough time to practice these a little bit. So we've got, I'm going to go backwards again. We started with lettering, and we moved to connectors and arrows, and frames and bullets. And now let's go to faces. So with faces, I think the big thing here is just to make sure that kids know how to show emotion. And so I'll tell them this isn't the time for, a detailed hairstyle or earrings or drawing their shirt. We're just going to do something simple and quick to show surprise or anger or love. And many kids know how to draw more detailed emojis that they've practiced, which is great. But we want them to also be able to do something quick here, and to always realize there's a difference between a sketch and a drawing, and we're just doing some quick little sketch for sketch notes. So go ahead and try some faces. Try to show some of the big human emotions: happiness, anger, sadness, indifference, surprise, etc. And I think it's good for kids to practice these without text at first, because then when it comes time for text, they will have already practiced it, and it's sort of already in their visual vocabulary, I guess you could say. Psychologist, I guess she would call herself a sociologist and researcher, Brene Brown, says that a lot of us carry around art scars that we got when we were younger, and we feel, like we can't take a risk, we're not very confident, we think we are terrible. And, I think that's true. I'm sure our art educators would tell us that sometimes they see their younger students with a greater freedom to take a risk, and are more fluent with their creative thoughts than sometimes older kids are. And for many of us, maybe, we have stopped adding to our visual lexicon a long time ago. Maybe you haven't really drawn or sketched anything since you were in 4th or 5th grade. And so just like anything else, with a little bit of daily practice, you improve in leaps and bounds. So after you're finished with faces, let's go ahead and do figures. And sometimes this is hard for kids who are really talented, artistic, like visually, because they do know how to make a realistic representation. And so I'll just tell those kids, just anything that you can do quickly is fine. If you're reading and responding and sketchnoting with something, you're probably not going to have a great deal of time. So become comfortable. Find some way that you're comfortable with something quicker. So for me, that's just quick stick people. And if I angle the arms and legs, I can make them do whatever I want them to do. I can use a shape to thicken up the body if I want to, or some other little feature. But it might not be that I'm just showing, a person in my notes. It might be that I'm showing a concept. Like if I put 3 figures together and they're holding hands, maybe that's going to mean unity or community or neighborhood or something like that. So the more you practice, the better you get. And the more comfortable we get with imperfection, then that's the key right there. All right, so that's faces and figures. Just one more, and then we'll stop with this part and move right into trying it out. So I saved word pictures for last. Word pictures would just be any time that you can reduce an idea to a small icon or symbol, and then you can add a word or phrase to it. So I usually give kids this index card example full of some ideas or little things that they could draw, but I'm not limiting to this. I rarely have a kid who copies directly off of this. Some will get some ideas, but I'll just let them know that every one of them already has a whole collection of things that they know how to draw. So use some of those. And so the cool thing about this is that, let's take that house in the middle for an example. If I had a 2nd grader draw that house, it might mean where they live. If I had an 11th grader draw that house, it might mean identity or community, or it could mean culture. It could mean all kinds of things. So the more complex kids' thinking gets as they get older, that's great. But these simple word pictures can just stay the same. They're sort of timeless. So I'll be quiet for a minute and just let you practice a few. And like I said, I'll encourage kids to write a word or a phrase with each one. Like that one of that coffee cup could be comfort, or it could be morning, or it could be me time, or it could be anything. So there is a resource that I use with this. I don't know if any of you use it, the Noun Project. It's free. There's a level that's free, the nounproject.com. I have heard that there's a verb project, but I haven't used it yet. But the Noun Project is just a collection of all sorts of simple ways that you could draw anything. And so if I need to draw a cell phone, but I can't quite get it right, I can go to the Noun Project and type in cell phone, and it's going to come, I'm not kidding, it's going to come back with 1,000 or more different small ways that artists have created a cell phone with just simple lines. A lot of the icons are Creative Commons, so you feel free to use them. And if it's not, it lets you know. But it's very, very helpful. I haven't used it with kids because I'm not sure of the kid-safe nature of it. But I've definitely used it for myself, and it's helped me out of a jam several times when I needed to figure out how to make a simple symbol for something. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you Now, this is completely up to you, of course, but if you don't mind turning your camera on, you could just hold up to the camera what your features practice looked like. So we'll see if we have anybody who doesn't mind doing that. And we can just appreciate how different everybody's looks. And if I was in a classroom with kids, of course, we would be getting up out of our seats and walking around and sharing with each other and seeing good ideas and stealing them and coming back and put them on our pages so we can just grow. So just like I was saying earlier, you have a visual lexicon and it grows just like your regular vocabulary does. And with just a little bit of practice, it makes all the difference in the world. All right, so here's the fun part.
Mine says that I have a question.
Okay, sure.
Mine says you cannot, it says you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it.
I'm not sure.
That may be on my end, Elizabeth. Let me check that. Let's go ahead.
Okay.
And we'll try to get.
We'll keep going. You might not need it again after this.
Go ahead, Tanny.
Sorry about that. That's happened to me too when I've been the presenter and I can't present. So, all right. Well, a couple things that I want you to just remember as we go into trying this out. And for those of you who are art teachers, you may have a greater level of comfort with trying this out, but I think it's good for us all to remember that not everybody feels that way. And for teachers who teach in the content area who don't have a daily, dose of drawing or sketching or even creating something, this feels a little like it's, walking out on the ledge a little bit, and that's okay. But that's how it's going to be in a classroom too. So sometimes kids wonder, like, what do I do if I get stuck? And so if you're wondering that same thing, here's what I always advise them. There are two questions: what's important and what's interesting. So if I get stuck and I don't know what to do next, I'll try to ask myself one of those things, and that helps me jumpstart into getting it done again. What do I think is important to me or to somebody else? What do I think is interesting? What's surprising? What's something brand new? Any of those things would be great to put in a sketch note. Now, if any of you have worked with gifted identified students or high achieving students, you might know this to be true. Sometimes those students will not be so willing to take a risk if they don't know that it's the right answer. And so I had an experience like that with some gifted 4th and 5th graders, and we ended up making this. They were saying, like, how do I know if it's okay to put it in the sketch note or not? And so I said, well, let's just brainstorm a whole big list of all the things that would be okay to put in a sketch note. And so we started with names and dates and facts, and then we widened it up a little bit: feelings and surprises and relationships, inferences, comparisons, controversies. Any and all of those things are okay to put in. Now, they're always going to be tying back to the topic, because remember, we sort of made a distinction between just regular doodling and sketchnoting. So these visual notes that we're going to take right now are going to have to do with, they're going to relate to the topic at hand, and I'll reveal that in just 1 minute. So I thought that was worth the time for that group, at least, to just put it all out there and say, like, all this stuff's okay. You've got permission. Sometimes those kinds of kids just need permission to do it. So we're going to start now. We're going to give it a go, as they say. I hope you have a new page to sketch note on, or at least a big section, a half sheet or something like that, because I'm going to give you a lot of information. We're going to be focusing on a woman who I think should be famous, and she's not quite there yet. But she led a really interesting life, and I want to tell her all about you. Or I want to tell you all about her. So I'm going to present to you about her with pictures and some text on the screen. I'm going to tell you some stories about her. You won't be able to capture everything in your sketch note. So try to let go of that urgency to catch it all and just go with, what do you think is interesting and what do you think is important? So here we go. Our sketch note today is going to be about Emma Gatewood. most commonly referred to as Grandma Gatewood. And so on your sketch note, you can do like a lot of kids will do. They'll put her name right in the middle with a special lettering, and they'll put a box or a frame around it. But you could put her name at the top. You could put it in the corner. You could put it in the center at the top. All these decisions are up to you. Whether you use color or not, that's up to you. I try to make all that stuff up to the kids, give those decisions right back to them. The only like rule that I'm giving them is that what they're representing on the page has to have to do with our topic and what they're learning or what their new thinking is. So I'm going to be making this sketch note with you. A lot of students will see this first picture of her, and they'll make a little sign in their notes with AT on it, the Appalachian Trail. Or they might draw Grandma's walking stick or her knapsack or some tennis shoes or some trees. They don't know a lot about her yet. I imagine there'd be somebody in this group who would know a lot about her already. That could be, but maybe some of you don't know anything about her, and that's okay. We can all sketch note. Doesn't matter. And it sort of differentiates itself, which is awesome. So I'm going slowly with this because I'm sketch noting right along with you. So I guess the thing you need to know about Grandma, first of all, is that she was the first woman ever to walk the Appalachian Trail from one end to the other. And this picture that you're seeing, this black and white photo, is one of the most famous pictures of her. There aren't a lot of pictures of her. She didn't like to be photographed. This is the one, if you read a book about her or something, you're for sure gonna see this picture. So in my notes, I'm gonna make like a little ribbon, like first place winner. She was the first woman. And I'll just keep going with the slides and you capture what you can. So there was a best-selling book about her called Grandma Gatewood's Walk. So after today, if you get curious about her, I'd recommend this book to you. It tells you everything about her life, not just the pretty parts, but the hard parts of her life, and she did lead a hard life. By Ben Montgomery. And I think his writing about her maybe started to get people more interested in her. You can see there that she doesn't have a lot of expensive clothing or hiking gear or anything. She made a lot of her own clothes. She did not have expensive hiking boots. They called her an ultralight hiker because she hardly carried anything with her, always less than 20 pounds. And if you need a reminder about the Appalachian Trail, here you go. It goes through 14 states. Starts in Georgia and ends in Maine, or vice versa. And it's well over 2,000 miles long. Most people start in Georgia and walk north, just because the amount of time it takes to walk and you sort of fighting the weather and all of that. I think most people have found that that makes more sense, but not everybody does it that way. And I'll repeat again, 14 states. I'm putting that in my notes. So I don't know what your notes look like so far, but I've got first woman to walk the Appalachian Trail. I put 2,000 plus miles. I made a little dotted line for the trail, Georgia to Maine, and I have her name. That's about all I have so far. So here's a picture. You can pick from any of this that you want to put in your notes. This is a picture of what she would normally carry with her. She had a knapsack that she made, just a canvas sack, not even waterproof. She would carry an extra pair of socks, a book to read, a journal to write in. Her glasses, you can't see them very well there, and they'd sometimes get cracked or she'd step on them, and that would be a hardship for a while till she got them repaired. But the thing I always think about is her footwear. Since she didn't have or couldn't really afford nice hiking boots, she wore just like Keds or Converse tennis shoes, whatever she could buy cheaply at the nearby town. And she went through, I forget how many pairs of shoes on the way. What you don't see there is food, and that's also very curious. She did not carry a lot of food with her. I don't know if it was because she didn't want animals to be attracted to it or she didn't want the weight of it, but she would often just rely on the kindness of strangers for her meals. So, like if a troop of scouts went by, then she would ask them to share, or if she saw a farmhouse out in the distance, she would go over there and see if they had anything left over from dinner last night. And so that's how she navigated it. So for many of us, that would be really a lot of anxiety, not knowing where our next meal was coming from. But that's how she navigated this. Sometimes I think I read she would carry a can of sardines with her, something like that. Now in Ohio, they've started to put some historical markers up about her. I won't ask you to try to read all that small print, but she was born in Ohio and lived her whole entire life in Ohio. And you may be able to see in that first line, she was 67 years old when she first walked the trail. Whew, that's pretty amazing. I'm 55 and I can't imagine doing it now. So she was 67. And I've heard that they're in process of making a huge mural of her in Gallipolis, which is the town she lived close to. It's right on the Ohio River, way out east. So here's her grave site. And this tells you how much I admire her and am interested in her. I went to see this last summer. Took a little couple-hour drive from where I live, and one of my friends and my husband, and we went out to see the gravesite. And people had told me that sometimes when you visit her gravesite, there are flowers in old tennis shoes that people had left. So I was hoping to see that, but there wasn't anything like that the day I went there. So you can see born in 1887, passed away in 1973. That might look like a 5, but I think it's a 3. And you can see the National Campers and Hikers Association emblem there on her gravestone. But it's just in a little unassuming cemetery up on a hillside by the Ohio River. Really pretty little spot. Now, I don't have a picture of this, but I'm not a beer drinker. But one of the breweries here in Cincinnati has a special edition Grandma Gatewood beer out right now. So I don't know if you can get Mad Tree beers where you are, but I bought actually a 12-pack of beer for the first time in my life last week, and it's just going to probably sit there on my shelf, but it has her on the side, and all the profits that they make, all the proceeds that they make from this Grandma Gatewood beer are going towards improving hiking in Ohio and contributing to the creation of this mural about her. Okay, here are a few things that we can quantify. I think I mentioned some of these already. You can just put any of these in your notes, however you'd like. So there's not really a common agreement about how long the Appalachian Trail is, because there's erosion and there's rerouting of it and there's construction and different things that happen, flooding. But most people will agree that it's well over 2,000 miles long, that it goes through 14 states. And then the incredible part about it is, and I don't know if any of you have, or if you have relatives who have hiked the trail, but if so, you know that if you walk at a pace of about 15 miles per day, then you can get there in about 6 months. So that's walking about 15 miles per day every day, no matter if it's raining or snowing or whatever. And only about 1 in every 4 people who say they're going to do it actually do it. Most people give up in the first week or 2, but Grandma Gatewood, she did give up on her first time, I will say. But it wasn't because of her lack of trying. It was, she got there, I think she got some kind of transportation from Ohio down to Georgia to the beginning of the trail. And she set out determined to do it. And some of the forest rangers found out that a woman was out there on the trail all by herself, and they didn't think that was appropriate. So they found her and convinced her that this was unsafe and not a good idea and that she should go back home. And so she got back home. By the time she got back home, she was so mad, she was so angry and disappointed in herself that she let these guys talk her out of it, that she soon went back and did it. And nobody could tell her anything different. So she had it in her heart that she was going to do it. The picture you see is a little red beanie that she would wear, and after a while she had different hiking patches that she sewed on there. So hopefully your notes are getting a little more crowded now with all these things about Grandma. And you know, if the research holds true, if you hear about Grandma Gatewood 6 months from now, you're going to remember the things you learned about her today because you're processing with a pen in your hand. It's a much different experience than if I just gave you an article to read about Grandma and we talked about it. Because some of you would read it, some of you wouldn't. Some would make connections, some wouldn't. But this way, with images and words and listening at the same time, it gives everybody an entry point. Everybody has a way that they like to learn about it. So a few more things I didn't tell you about Grandma. So here's where she was born, Gallia County. And the main town there, the county seat, is Gallipolis. And I don't think it's too far. Like if you know where Greenup County is, I don't think it's too far across the river up that way. Anyway, when she was married, she had 11 children with her husband, who was a school teacher, 11 kids. After the 11th one left home, so she was, you know, an older woman by that time, all the kids left home, she called them up and told them, I'm going for a walk, and took off. And that's when she was 67. And I'm not sure, I think age 67 is when she actually did it for the first time. So I'm not sure how old she was with that failed attempt at first, but probably close around the same age. She did have a rough life, as I mentioned before, and I won't go into the details, but not everything was perfect with her marriage. And I think, and a lot of people agree, that by the time she got to be in her 60s, she needed something to do that was meaningful, and took off as almost like a therapeutic kind of experience, determined that she was going to do this for herself. She heard about the Appalachian Trail in a magazine at the doctor's office. She didn't even know it existed, and then sort of got it in her mind that she was going to do it. Now, the other thing that I didn't tell you that's really important is she hiked it 3 times before she died. So that's pretty amazing. She was not only the first woman to hike it, but she hiked it 3 times. And then closer to the end of her life, people started hearing about her and how amazing this was. And so Sports Illustrated ran a feature on her. She was on the Today Show. There's at least an interview or 2 on YouTube that you can watch. She wasn't the greatest interviewee in the world. She didn't really have much to say. But then people started getting interested in her when that book came out. And then also in 2018, the New York Times ran an obituary, much belated, but ran an obituary just sort of highlighting all the things she did and how she brought attention to hiking in a positive way, not just for women, but for everybody. And so I think she was pretty amazing. Now, there are picture books about her. You might have noticed on the last slide, there's Grandma Gatewood Hikes the Appalachian Trail by Jennifer Thermes. That one highlights the geography and shows maps of every state. It's a really beautiful book. I've been working with Greenup County Schools for about a year now, and this is one of the books that the teachers got as part of the project that we were working on together. And then there's When Grandma Gatewood Took a Hike, written by Michelle Houts, and illustrated by Erica Magnus. And it sort of shows you the uglier side of doing this, like when she got bug bites all over her whole entire body, or mice made a nest in her hair overnight when she was sleeping, and all the blisters on her feet. And so she went through all of that because she was so determined. So I'm going to stop there for a second and I'm going to ask you to just look at your sketch note that you've created, even if it's not finished yet. Go into the chat and I'm going to ask you, what do you know about Grandma Gatewood that you didn't know 15 minutes ago? So we don't have a way to flood our ideas together on chart paper or anything. We'll have to do it in the chat. I'm going to go into the chat, and if you would, it might take more than one entry, but just go ahead. Don't worry about if other people are writing the same things, but use your sketch note as the basis and go ahead and start flooding that chat with all the things you know about Grandma Gatewood. And I'll mute my mic and we'll come back together in a moment. Well, I love what Brandy put. She says she knew zero, so everything was new. And I'll tell kids, it's when you don't have any background knowledge about something, you really should feel sort of lucky because you have the most to learn. And I think just thinking about everything you've learned, and it's all there in the chat right now. I think people picked up on every single thing if we look at it collectively. Um, this is going to stick with you. You'll remember more. You'll remember it longer. It's the opposite of what the trap we sometimes fall into as teachers, which is assign and assess, assign and assess. We're sort of learning collaboratively, and it's very low risk. Odessa picked up on bug bites and blister. That'd be a good name for a book about her, probably. So, oh, and Heather, that's so funny you mentioned the beer too. So, yeah. So yeah, my husband does like to drink beer, so we'll see. Maybe some of those cans of beer are going to be disappearing out of that 12 pack I got. So I'll ask you another question now. So we've got all of it covered in the chat, like our new learning about Grandma Gatewood. So I'm going to ask you now, how was it learning about something with pen in hand? How was that for you? Some people might say it was really hard for me. Maybe some of you found it difficult to listen and read and sketchnote at the same time, or maybe you thought it was great. I don't know. I'd just like to know how you felt about it. That's sort of our little effort at being metacognitive here. What was it like for us? Think about our own thinking. Alex is saying they remember so much better. Why didn't somebody show me this when I was in school? I agree with you. And I don't know, probably some of you have had a similar experience. I didn't show you, and I'll tell you this while people are continuing entering stuff in the chat. As an adult, even just a few years ago, I went to a curriculum meeting, and it was about some new resources we were going to adopt or something. And I brought my notebook and I had a couple pens, and I was really hanging on every word everybody said because I was very interested about what we were going to do. And so I was probably sketchnoting in my notebook. And afterwards, about 20 minutes later, one of the supervisors came to me and said, well, I just want to tell you, like, we could tell you weren't paying attention in the meeting. And I just felt embarrassed and a little mad and probably couldn't articulate it in the moment how I felt. But I think it's a difficult thing because there are so many misconceptions out there that I'm sure some of you have had that same experience, even if it was back when you were a kid. about stop drawing, put your pencil down, you can't do that now kind of thing. And why in the world we don't maximize the opportunities for learning by putting our arms around this and letting kids know that this is a way that people think. And it's not, off limits to us. And there's nothing about this that isn't academic or rigorous enough. In fact, it increases all of those things. So, all right. I'm going to share my screen again. I hate when people say, I'm going to share my screen, and then I say that same thing. So sorry. Need to think of something else to say. And so the bigger question is, how do you think sketch notes could help you or help your students? So we'll zero in on the students part there. Can you think of a particular student who you think will benefit from this? Or can you think of a group of students you work with this year who might benefit? You might think of students who are learning English as an additional language. How might they benefit? Or what about students who have a hard time expressing themselves in conventional writing, or maybe don't talk very much to other peers or even to you? I think there are all kinds of kids who can benefit from this in all kinds of ways. So if you have a thought about that, about just the helpfulness and support that it can lend to a student or a group of students, please go ahead and put that in the chat so it's in there. And I really look forward to reading all of these comments when Wendy sends this to me later on. So we've got just about a little less than a half an hour before we break. And I just want to share with you, first of all, 8 ways that you could use sketchnoting in the moment in your classroom, because we could think about it sketchnoting afterwards, like sketchnoting after we read or after we learn about something or after we listen to a speech or a podcast. But what about right in the moment? And so at the end of Ink and Ideas, I have a whole section about this. So I just chose 8 ways to be present with the pen. So for those of you who like to have order in your notes, you might want to number these right now, 1 through 8. They're in no particular order, but I think these are just everyday things we can do. So here's the first one. Number 1 would just be to give kids the option to sketchnote during a read aloud. And I like saying give the option because there might be kids who want to just sit still and listen during a read aloud. So after you've had that launching lesson where you introduce it to everybody, everybody knows what we're going to call it, everybody knows what it's like to experience it, then you can offer it up as an option. For some kids, they find it to be very calming. It helps them visualize what they're hearing. And it's really a practice that improves listening comprehension, and a lot of us can use all the help we can get with that. So number 1 would be to sketchnote during a read aloud. Number 2 would be to sketchnote while listening to music. And I haven't mentioned music teachers very much in this session, and I should have, because so many of these same strategies that we use in the ELA classroom are also what music teachers do all the time, especially with visualizing, but also with asking questions and making inferences and all those good strategies we know that thinkers use. So I try to include more music in my teaching and lesson planning. I'm a music lover. For my classroom teacher years, I had a piano in my room and I tried to incorporate music, but sometimes we get the idea, just like with art, unfortunately, people get the idea that that's an if we have time kind of thing. And instead of a way to get there, it's a pathway to understanding music is. And so just like we want kids to read and reread, we can have kids listen and re-listen when we are listening for repetition, for themes, et cetera, big ideas. We can use the lyrics as text if we want. We can use instrumental music for visualizing. So many ways to use music. And in my first book, Comprehension Connections, in every chapter I have music and art connections. But there are definitely, in my book, Ink and Ideas, there are definitely some examples of people who sketchnote while listening to music. Number 3, with all kinds of other audio content, and there's so much out there, And so much of it is just free and at our fingertips right now. So whether it's a podcast or a TED Talk or an audiobook, it could be a speech or a keynote, it could be spoken word poetry, so many things we can choose to listen to, and they can be short or long, and it can make connections to history and social studies and science or whatever it might be. So letting kids create the visual for that, because there is not a visual for that mostly. And so hopefully they're going to have a little movie running in their mind while they're listening to those things and getting some of it out on paper. It's like capturing that thinking that otherwise we might not ever know existed. Number 4 would be with text excerpts. So maybe we wouldn't want to use sketchnoting with a really long story or a whole entire chapter in a textbook. You know, there is such thing as too much of a good thing, so we don't want to kill the joy of it. But pulling out a shorter text excerpt, like that example I showed you with the Dust Bowl, where it was just a page or two long, we chunk the text into pieces and then give kids a little room to make a sketch note. So you might want to consider doing this if it's text that's really hard for kids. And some people might call it unfriendly text if the kids don't have a lot of background knowledge about it. Maybe it has a hard level of vocabulary. Those are the times when we might want to slow it down a little bit and just have kids, you know, decelerating, I guess I could say, and talking and sketching their way through, hopefully for a deeper understanding. Number 5 would be with any direct instruction you give. And I think this is tricky because sometimes we feel like kids need to be making eye contact with us at all times during direct instruction. And so that's the thing that, you know, you got to know your kids and you've got to have taught this to them, and they have to understand the purpose of sketchnoting. But for some, it can help them actually fight distraction and boredom. And it's not them tuning out, it's them attempting to stay tuned in. So there are a lot of examples of this, and I listed a few there. And I love that little part at the bottom. It can compensate for a short attention span. It could be one thing that could help you get through those times. Number 6 would be to sketch note when you're just creating notes around the page. So if it's something where you're allowed to write on the page, or maybe you're using some sketchnoting platform or app or something where you can annotate, like in Google Drawing, for example, right on the screen. So we'll call it marginalia, but I know it's called all kinds of things. Some teachers call it tracks in the snow if you're making notes in the white space. I heard some Florida teachers call it footprints in the sand. I like that better. But as we know, if kids don't have a way to capture their thinking on the way through, they're going to lose it. And just using a highlighter probably doesn't do it. So it could be on sticky notes, it could be around the margins, it could be any place you can be making these notes, even just, you know, in a notebook on notebook paper along the way. So that's number 6. 2 more. Here's number 7. Number 7 would be sketchnoting live when you're viewing things. So let's say we're looking at a painting, or we're looking at an antique object, or we're in math and we're looking at some manipulatives, or maybe we're in science and we're observing something from nature. The examples could go on and on and on. It could be a photograph. It could be a piece of sculpture. But kids are viewing and then they're creating some interpretation of their own thinking on the page. So one thing I dropped in the Google folder was a little light green card that's a See, Think, Wonder card. I use that all the time. Maybe you do too, that kind of thing where it's like, let's just look at it and talk about what we see. Let's talk about what we think about that. And then what do we wonder? Let's generate some questions. So it's really an effort to teach kids to just slow down a little bit and really dwell and really look at something. Now, if you're a social studies teacher, this could be a map. It could be, you know, if you have a social studies text, sometimes social studies textbooks have the most amazing artwork and visuals, even if the text isn't written at a level that interests us all. So I think there are lots of opportunities here just to teach kids to slow down and really look at something. And then number 8 would be a daily sketch. And so this can be incorporated in so many ways. Just like you might have a problem of the day or a word of the day, you could have a daily draw where it's just a couple minutes, and it might be that you have a word on the board. Maybe you have the word birdhouse, and in kids' journals, they just quickly draw a birdhouse. If they had to draw it in their sketches, what would it look like? And so there's lots of people who do this in different ways. Some people keep notebooks, morning pages, gratitude journals, etc., etc. There's people who are into bullet journaling, all sorts of things. But we do know that if we want to become better at this, it's going to take a little bit of practice. And so that's a fun way to do it, is just have some kind of quick daily draw. So all those, like I said, are not in any order, but all of them are extremely possible to fit in the things that we already do. Now, there is a TED Talk. I want you to jot the name of this down. And please, if you're interested in this topic and want to learn more, take 15 minutes sometime and watch Graham Shaw have a little experience with the audience. It's called Why People Believe They Can't Draw and How to Prove They Can. And he's delightful to listen to and takes you through an interactive sketching experience. And you can do this with your students. So everything's appropriate, language is appropriate, all of it. And he shows you that even if you think you barely can pick up a pen and make anything that's recognizable, you really can. And it's a shifting of your mindset. And he draws and has you do what he does. And I've had students say, this is the best thing I've ever drawn after they go through this little experience with him. If we had more time today, we'd do it together. But just know that that's out there, and I highly recommend it. Now, just a couple other things before we end up today. So I'm going to take us back to 9 o'clock this morning when we started, and I showed you this Venn diagram and said, really, this session is all about thinking. You know, somebody might ask you, what did you do this morning in that class? And you might say, like, I learned about sketchnoting, and that would be true. Or I learned about how to use words and pictures together. That would be true. But really, when we dig down deeper, what we just experienced about sketchnoting is really about valuing kids' thinking, about valuing every student's thinking, about thinking about all thinking matters. When we say all means all when it comes to kids, that every student in your class has thinking that matters. And sometimes it's not going to come out in an indented paragraph with 5 sentences in it. Sometimes we've got to give kids alternative ways to get their thinking captured, and so that it's shareable. And sketchnoting is just one way to go about doing that. I wanted to share with you an experience I had, and this, believe it or not, is from a first grader, where he says that when I asked the question, I was in a first grade classroom, and we sort of posed the question to the kids, what's it mean when you're really reading something? And he gave it the best definition ever. He said, it's real deep thinking. And that's what our workshop has been about this morning, is real deep thinking with pen in hand. I had an experience a couple years ago when Mr. Park reached out to me. He's the guy in the light blue shirt that you see standing to my left in the picture. And he is a producer for KBS, that's the Korean Broadcasting System in Seoul, South Korea. He and his team came to the United States in an effort to study metacognition and what's it really mean when kids are thinking about their thinking. And they were producing a documentary about this. And he actually did a little bit of filming with me with some second grade kids. And there's the Venn diagram you can see in the lower picture and all of that. I wanted to tell you about this just to say that after he interviewed researchers at different universities, and they synthesized everything they learned into this documentary. He did send me a DVD, but I can't understand it because I don't speak the language. So anyway, I asked him in an email just to synthesize for me, what did they come up with as a result of studying metacognition? And here's what they found. 2 things that I think go right along with what we've learned today. That deceleration can accomplish more than acceleration, and spacing is more effective than cramming. So here's what I think they mean by that. I don't mean that we're slowing things down to a really miserable, deadly pace and reading the same book after month. And I don't mean that I'm not talking about like the kind of acceleration we might use in a gifted curriculum, for example, or compacting, not talking about that. I'm talking about the kind of urgency we feel as educators sometimes when we're teaching as much as we can, as quickly as we can, at breakneck speed, trying to fit in all the standards and the curriculum, and we got a pacing guide, and I'm right there with you. That's the world I live in too. But sometimes we need to teach kids that a moment of deceleration can really get us further. So turning and talking, creating a quick sketch note to summarize our learning, all those kinds of things really can move us faster and deeper into thinking. And then same thing, a little space here and there where we're reflecting. And I think sketchnoting can be the perfect way to just summarize and synthesize and show what we're thinking can be more effective than just moving as fast as we can and getting it all done and watching that clock, and all of that. So I hope that resonates with you, because it really did with me after they found that. So just a little closing story about a Catholic priest. And I'm not Catholic, and so he wasn't my priest. But Father Lou Gunselman was a Catholic priest here in the Cincinnati area who I had heard about him. Everybody who knew anything about him or who had visited his parish, just really respected this man and what he had to say, and how he had a knack about taking scripture and just finding ways to make it relevant and connect to people. And so actually our community newspapers picked him up as a weekly columnist. And so it wasn't about religion or Catholicism or anything like that. It wasn't about even spiritual matters necessarily, but it was just about things that he found that were truths in life. And on Wednesdays, when the Community Journal newspaper would come out, it would be on the countertop at my school. I would grab that paper and skip over everything just to find Father Lou Gunselman's column. And this one, as you can see, if you can tell through my doodles, was called Speed Gets Us Nowhere Fast. And I pulled out one thing that he said in the article and wrote it underneath the title. Skim talking and skim reading promote skim thinking. So I was like, wow, I, just thought this applies to me in my life so much. And I think my kids were at an age at that time where everything was so busy in our household. I just started pulling out all the little nuggets of truth and putting them around the margins. Everyone should be free to go very slowly. He calls it the cult of speed. We need discipline enough to create times of quiet. Let's see. There are just so many of these. I wish I could read them all. Speed begins to cause us to leave behind parts of our own selves. We can accomplish great work with a light touch. Speed can become a great defense mechanism for hiding behind, etc., etc. So I took that article, I cut it out of the newspaper eventually, stuck it in my planner, and I didn't get around to rereading it and putting all these sketch notes around it till much later. But it really stuck with me all this time, and I really think it's true. And I think this is one more benefit that sketch notes provides for us. It slows us down. It makes us stick with a paragraph for a little bit longer, or listen again to that poem that we heard just once before, or stop that song in the middle of it and let's listen to the second verse one more time while we sketch note it. I think, all of us can agree that we feel like as a society, we're just moving faster, we're reading faster, we're trying to fit as much in as possible. And that has an effect and takes a toll on student learning in the classroom. And so I really feel like sketch notes can help us decelerate. It reminds me of two things, probably two pictures you never thought you'd see together on the same screen. There's Chevy Chase at the Grand Canyon, and there's the Mona Lisa. So if you ever saw Chevy Chase's movie, National Lampoon's vacation, you might remember how they tried to get to the Grand Canyon and, come hell or high water, they were going to get there and horrible things happened on the way. But when they finally get there, he puts his arm around his wife and they look at the Grand Canyon for literally like 2 seconds. And he says, okay, we saw it, let's go. And I think that's not so far of an exaggeration about how we look at artwork and how our students look at artwork. When I go to a museum, I notice how some people's feet never stop moving. A lot of people don't know how to decelerate, exhale, and really look at something. It reminds me of, and perhaps some of you have seen the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, I have not, but I've heard experience after experience about how you only get to look at the Mona Lisa for about 10 or 15 seconds, and then you're pushed along by the crowd. And so I think this whole idea of deceleration is really important, and that's why I wanted to end with these thoughts about it, because I really do think sketchnoting is a tool to help us with that. There's a new picture book that's out that's called A Walk in the Words by Hudson Talbot. I shared it during my keynote at KRA this year, a few months back. It's about a guy named Hudson, the author. It's biographical. So he writes about his problems with learning to read and write and how he noticed he was what he calls a slow reader. And it wasn't until later that he started finding out that lots of brilliant thinkers down through time were slow readers. Some of these people he features here in his Slow Readers Hall of Fame are some of the same people I featured in my book, saying they were also visual note takers. And then he says, I experimented with ways to tell my stories. I could tell a story with pictures, or I could tell it with words. My favorite way was using both. So I think if you're an art educator, this book is for you because it shows how kids with, and he even goes on to say that he was later diagnosed with dyslexia, but how for kids like Hudson, being able to use the pen is the pathway into literate lives. And he also reminds us that reading speed isn't everything. We do know there's research about a certain speed for reading does lend itself to deeper comprehension, so I'm not arguing that. But sometimes to understand in a nuanced way, we really have to slow down. So he says he tore down that terrible wall of shame and slow readers savor the story. And I wanted to share this article with you. So you're going to need to jot this down because I don't think I had a PDF or anything to drop into our Google folder. But if you Google search The Power of Patience, art teachers, you are going to be so interested in this if you haven't seen it before. And you can even find, if you Google search Jennifer Roberts Harvard, you can find it's not a TED Talk, but it's actually a presentation she made about her work. It's about this study, The Power of Patience, where she wanted to teach her art history students at Harvard that they've really got to decelerate and slow down and get immersed in what they're viewing. And she felt like many of her students weren't able to do that. Even though they loved art history, they loved taking this course, all of it, it's still they really hadn't taught themselves the value of slow looking. And so she's funny to listen to, so smart, but she did an experiment with her students where they had to look at John Singleton Copley's A Boy with a Flying Squirrel for like 3 hours. I'm not kidding. So you've got to listen to her and find out what happened and what her students discovered about looking at something for a long time. Anne Berthoff, who was a writer of professional books, said students who learn to look and look again are discovering their powers. So I'm going to stop there today because our time is just about up, and I made you the promise that the best workshops always end early, and I'm going to keep that promise by a couple minutes. But I would love to hear from you just one last time in the chat about what resonated with you today. If you had to just sum it all up in a sentence or two, has there been something that was meaningful? I hope so. Is there something you're excited about? Maybe you didn't learn much new information today, but maybe you feel affirmed in the things that you already believed with a couple new pieces of research. So I'm going to mute just for about a minute, minute and a half, and so that I can hear from you in the chat, and then we'll come back together to close momentarily. Well, a huge thank you to Wendy for making this all possible and for having the idea and for doing all the paperwork and all the communication that it takes and bringing these two groups together this morning. I don't know if you all agree, I'm sure you do though, that the chat has been richer because we have so many different kinds of teachers together. And I love it that we're seeing these common threads. The power that happens with thinking in the art room is sometimes hidden from others in the school. And sometimes I just feel like everything that we teach in the standards in every other subject can be amplified in the art classroom through what art teachers already do. Not asking necessarily for them to be having an eye towards the other standards, which isn't a bad thing, but just the processes for thinking that art educators employ every single day. I just feel like there's not a thing in our curriculum, K through 12, that we can't teach that way. So I feel like a kindred spirit with the art educators who are here today, and I thank you for welcoming me. And like I told you, I'm not an art teacher, but I'm married to one. So, I mean, that's about as close as you can get, I guess. So thank you to everybody, and I'm sure Wendy has a closing comment or so. And just don't forget about that Google folder with the resources in it. And also just feel free to reach out if there's anything that comes up where I could be of help. If your county or your school ever has a need for professional development, that's part of what I do. So you can reach out to me for that too. I'd love to work with you in that context as well. So thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. I know that just based on chat and based on all the smiling and head nodding, I know that's one reason why I did want to kind of marry the two grants together, because I knew this was going to be one of those things you could walk away with and use on Monday. That's what we love. And like I say every time, what I love is that Tanny is still in the classroom. She's still with kids, and she knows that this is practical and applicable and that this works with kids. And I know that you all were much like me. As we were practicing this, you saw the benefits. I was loving the chat when some of you were like, I was trying to focus and trying to do that, but it does, cause us to slow down. And I don't know if you were like me, but I know that by being intentional about putting it on paper and, hearing it, seeing it, and then being, cognizant about putting it back in the chat, I'm never going to remember or never going to forget about Grandma Gatewood. That is going to be one of those, it's that disruptive learning that we've been talking about. And that's what we want kids to do as well. So I am so excited about this. I am going to say this, so make sure you hear. This session evaluation is only for my Renaissance teachers. So if you are in the Renaissance grant, this is only for you. Charge teachers, you all will be with me again this afternoon. So you will have your own session evaluation this afternoon, okay? So only fill this out if you are with the Renaissance Art Grant. Charge teachers, your session evaluation will come this afternoon.
And
We
Wendy,
got
there
a
is
comment in the chat.
yes, I was
Brittany,
going to
I'm
highlight
sorry.
Brittany's question. Oh, sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, that was it. I was going to address Brittany's question
Okay.
about the Google folder and the Bitly link. So.
Yes. The Google folder, yes, I will put that back in there. Is the Google folder I will put the Google folder, all of that back in there as well. Yes. So today was awesome. Thank you so much, Tanny, for giving us something to be warm and excited about on this cold Kentucky Saturday. This was fantastic. If you all have any questions, stick around. Otherwise, charge teachers, go grab you some lunch. I'll see you back on at 1 o'clock. It is a different link. Arts Grant folks, I'm glad the two of you all got to meet. Now you know when I'm not with you, I'm with Charge, and vice versa. So.
Oh my gosh, Wendy, this was the best session ever. I kept sending you pictures. She was speaking my love language.
I know, it was great. I told you all. That's why I kind of kept hyping it up. Tanny, I don't know if you have seen Twitter yet, but they're blowing your Twitter feed up. Both grants, it's amazing. So this was fantastic. I knew you all would love it.
Two things, Tanny. I just sent my principal an email about getting you to come to school, but also I can't find the link for this afternoon. I looked through my emails and I don't see anything about it.
Brandy, I will send that to you directly.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
Tanny, I
thank
think
you.
Tanny has left us, it looks like. She may have got kicked off, but you can put her contact information back in the, yeah.
And Brandy, I will send you the Google. Let me put that back in the chat. But I will send that to you directly as well, okay?
All right, thank you.
Yeah, she's fantastic. She's well worth it. And I knew that's why I kind of wanted to join everybody together. I asked Dr. Evans, I said, since the arts grant's paying for it, can I get charged to come? So it's always a good thing to double dip a little bit when we can. And you all get the benefit. So today was a great day. You all have a wonderful weekend. If you're in the arts and leaving me and charge folks, I'll see you all in a bit. I'm so excited to see people start using this on Monday. Yeah, I know you all are going to start using it. Robin, did you get that text? Good. If you are still on the arts grant and you're still here with me, I'm going to send out this afternoon as well book choices for our book club book. What am I want to say? Book study choices after today. So we will have choices from everyone that's presented thus far, including Tanny's book and like the ones Dr. Callie mentioned. So you'll get to choose and vote. So look for that email. We'll go ahead and make those choices and start our book club and maybe do some sketchnoting in this book club since that was highly touted.
I think we should. And
I
some
think we
visual
should.
thinking strategies.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah. It'd be super fun.
Yeah, I couldn't stop drawing the whole time because I was like, this is
I
what
know.
I'm do.
Well, and then I'm like, Robin, was it you that said I was doing a lot of writing instead of, I was putting a lot of words and I was like, no, you're supposed to be drawing.
Either
So,
one.
mine was a lot.
I took pictures. I'm a huge note taker. Like I have to write down every word, and I still put arrows and visuals and underlines and bubbles.
Like I was
but
putting way too many
I
words.
took pictures of her pages. Yeah, I knew she said she wasn't going to give us all of those things, and when I missed stuff, I want to go back and see it again. I know you've seen me